Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Hey, Odine.
Good morning.
Lamont. Hey, Sharon.
Tout le monde, comment ça va?
Hi,
Ça va très,
Flora.
très bien, Curtis. Et vous?
Good morning.
I thought I'd throw that out there and see who responded. Very well,
Oui.
Nadine. Very well.
Morning.
Well,
Merci, merci.
we're live. We're live. This is wonderful. We're live. Welcome everybody to today's groundbreaking, really phenomenal event that's being done. And Hugh is going to talk in a moment. And which I just wanted to personally thank the New Humanity Initiative and Hugh and Sharon for their wonderful contribution. I've worked on it for the last 6 weeks, and I tell you something, it's been a real experience, and I've learned so much, and I'm really so grateful that they gave me the opportunity and to really participate in this wonderful movement. And I'm going to pass it over to Hugh, and he's going to start and thank you once, Hugh, and thank you, Sharon, and thank you, everybody. And thank you to the guests and speakers. Hugh?
Thank you, Bruce. I'm really delighted to be co-hosting this event with you, and we really want to take the opportunity to welcome each and every one to our first virtual inaugural Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion in the Community conference, which is hosted by the New Humanity Initiative and CFO services by BizON Capital Corporation. And before I move forward, I just want to take the opportunity to acknowledge that we are on traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississauga of New Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Hodeshawnees, and the Wendat peoples. And the land is home to many First Nations, including the Inuit, Métis, and Mohawk. So just wanted to make sure that we acknowledge our traditional territory. So yes, I have the privilege of co-hosting this event with Bruce Singer, and you heard from Bruce introducing me. And just to share with you that in the wake of George Floyd's killing in Minneapolis, USA, instead of getting enraged, I decided to get engaged. And that, inspired what's now the New Humanity Initiative, which is a purposeful national nonprofit organization that is committed to promoting fundamental change that amplifies equity, access, and well-being for racialized and marginalized communities throughout our home and native land. So I just wanted to get a few housekeeping in that, while we welcome you to join us on video and become part of our growing community, we're asking that you remain muted and be respectful to all our speakers and participants. And of course, a quick highlight of today's event is that we will have our keynote session. We will have our panel discussion following titled Government and Community, then leading to our first Voices of Humanity segment, then our second panel discussion, Business and Community, followed by our community forums, which are concurrent breakout session. And that's where we expect to hear from our participants, because the community forums are part of the 7-pillar framework for the New Humanity Initiative to inform its work. So we ask that you share your insights, that the sponsor leads and our moderators can have a takeaway to send to the advisory committees for the New Humanity Initiative. And of course, we invite you to participate, become a volunteer. And it's my honor to have asked that Bishop Ransford James, is he on the call? Just if Bishop is on, can he unmute that we just have him just say a word for us? If he's not in, I'll just ask that we move straight into introducing our keynote speaker and share with you that we are indeed honored, we are indeed excited to welcome our keynote speaker, the Most Honorable Juliet Holness, MP from the island nation of Jamaica. And I turn this over to her and welcome Your Excellency to the program. At this time, I would just like to also share that we have Dr. Karen Dunkley, who is going to be sharing the keynote speech on behalf of Her Excellency Karen Dunkley, Global Diaspora Rep for Northeast USA, to bring the keynote remarks. Dr. Dunkley?
Thank you so much. Good
Over
morning
to you.
to everyone. I think I hear some background, Dr. Simmons. Is that Bishop trying to come in? Okay. As you can imagine, Mrs. Juliet Holness is just excited to deliver the keynote, and I'm going to read the keynote on behalf of Mrs. Holness. So good morning and thank you again. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, friends all. Let me thank the New Humanity Initiative and the organizers of this conference on equity, diversity, and inclusion in the community for having me as a keynote speaker at this inaugural event. I would also like to congratulate each of you on participating in this bold initiative, particularly in a world where society highlights differences in a negative way and magnifies these differences as reasons to divide us. It is an honor to address you on the theme of resilience and inclusive societies, and to share with this fantastic cast of speakers, supporters, and participants as we explore and affirm the fact that the world is indeed much more beautiful when we enjoy it in all its vibrant colors and communities. We share a common goal as humanity. This goal is to engender well-being for our citizens and communities. Societies collectively, through the lens of policies, practices, planning, and programs, seek to amplify and complement choices which structure, strengthen, and enable the accomplishment of human aspirations. In doing so, it becomes possible to achieve robust, resilient, and inclusive growth for all adults and children across generations. We now stand at the critical edge of a movement and a moment to challenge ourselves to create an inclusive society, especially in light of the COVID-19 pandemic and the recent uprisings calling for a call to action for equal rights and justice. An inclusive society aims to empower and promote the social, economic, emotional, psychological, physical, and political well-being of all people, regardless of the tapestry of our differences. Allow me to share 7 critical pillars or tenets that we can use to utilize to bring the concept and the vision of resilience for an inclusive society to fruition. Tenet 1, to strengthen inclusivity as a society, we ought to recognize and not ignore or diminish inequities, inequalities, and injustices. As Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. reminded us, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Tenet 2, we must organize ourselves into action groups that build awareness through collective conversations. And from these conversations, we must engage, not enrage, in meaningful actions that enhance societal well-being and enact radical change. The third tenet, we must know when to yield. We should demonstrate our commitment to a resilient and inclusive society. Despite our familial socialization and the traditional biases that we may have formulated, we must now yield to and engage in the collective wisdom of the group. Importantly, we must collaborate with civil society, business, and government to cultivate and strengthen the elements that foster inclusivity and investment in citizens and communities. Or fourth tenet, we must absolutely build or grasp the opportunities for inclusiveness. Having an awareness of the barriers to creating an inclusive society is not enough. Instead, we must create conditions for resiliency where they do not exist and compel all institutions to address deficiencies that threaten the social fabric of our societies. We have a duty to care for others. We have a duty to ensure the social cohesion by building or grasping opportunities to implement changes that help to hold our communities together, building inclusivity and resiliency. The fifth tenet is business. Businesses must now consider social impact. It is no longer sufficient or adequate for business to focus solely on profit making or profit margins. By fostering policy recommendations aimed at increasing business sensitivity and macroeconomic stability, we can now address long-term challenges and improve policymaking and coordination at all levels of government and society. The sixth tenet, we should strengthen our societies to require greater integration of underrepresented or unrepresented groups to ensure their participation in decision-making that enables an access that is high quality. This access will ensure a high quality education, community and social programs, healthcare, leisure, and progressive employment, including entrepreneurship, as well as an infrastructure that fosters creative and critical thinking. We must adhere to the sixth tenet to interrupt and disrupt the cycle of inequity, inequality, and ensure that the arc does indeed bend towards justice. The seventh and the final tenet, we must commit to the vitals, just like the vitals in our body that requires us to live. The critical inputs to achieve inclusive societies are enshrined in the provision of these vitals. What are these vitals, you may ask? These vitals include social protection, adequate and fair housing, healthcare, education, intellectual and economic empowerment of all citizens and communities. These vitals amplify sustainable human-centered growth and development. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, friends all, the only way that we can build an inclusive society is to commit to resiliency. The only way that we can realize the ideals of the New Humanity Initiative is to ensure that we apply ourselves by leveraging the 7 tenets. The United Nations General Assembly operationalized a resilient society to mean the ability of a system, community, or society exposed to hazards to resist, absorb, accommodate, adapt to transform, and recover from the effects of a hazard in a timely and efficient manner. Let us have the courage, let us challenge ourselves to stand on the 7 pillars of the New Humanity Initiative to create a world that recognizes the pivotal transformative forces at play. As Louis Armstrong, the famed songwriter and musician, reminded us, the colors of the rainbow so pretty in the sky are also on the faces of people going by. I see friends shaking hands, saying, "How do you do?" They're really saying, "I love you." I hear babies cry. I watch them grow. They learn much more than I'll ever know. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Yes, I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Do accept my best wishes for a successful conference. Congratulations to the New Humanity Initiative, the Most Honorable Mrs. Juliet Holness, Member of Parliament and wife of the Prime Minister, Jamaica. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Karen Dunkley. Really appreciate that. And I want to thank the Honorable Juliet Holness for delivering that insightful message. That was very heartfelt and very emotional, and very much appreciated that you took the time to do this. And it means a lot to Canada. And as we stand united, very much appreciated. Thank you. Hugh, you want to take us to the next?
All right. Thank you so much, Bruce. Thank you so much, Dr. Dunkley. I'm really excited on behalf of my co-host and I to welcome you to the Government and Community Panel discussion. And really, Bruce, what would like to have you do, if you would be kind, just introduce the speakers for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So we're going to introduce first. There's four. Our first session is government and community. We have Michael Thompson, who is the deputy mayor of the city of Toronto. We have Charmaine Williams, who is the councillor city of Brampton. We have Merle Africa, who is the president of the Canadian Association of Urban Professionals, and we have Christina Remedios from KPMG, who is their chief inclusion and social impact officer. So those are the people that will be joining us on this discussion. Thank you, speakers. So we're going to start. Just going to ask Michael. I'm just going for Michael first. You there?
I'm here. Good morning.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time and doing this. First question is, what are the initiatives that your city has taken to strengthen equity, diversity, and inclusion?
So again, good morning, Bruce, and good morning, Hugh, and thank you so much for having me on. I'm really delighted to participate in this tremendous initiative, actually, the New Humanity Initiative, and I think that's fantastic. Our city of Toronto is considered the most diverse city in the world, as many of you may know, and if you don't know, apparently this is by BBC News Broadcasting System, not by the city of Toronto itself. We have approximately 200,000 people who describe themselves as being Black here in the city of Toronto, and as such, we are required, of course, to address the issues that they're facing. We know that there are systemic racism and other biases and unconscious, some of them are unconscious and so on. And so the city of Toronto has taken a number of steps with respect to addressing the issue of inequality, diversity, and so on. But equality, diversity, and inclusion, we have focused our attention on what we call the anti-Black racism strategy for the city of Toronto. We have an entire department that's focusing on this particular area. We have met with the community to hear from them what their particular concerns are. And we have come up with 5 specific areas in which we have identified through the community consultation process. The first one in terms of areas of focus is children and youth development, health and community safety, job opportunities, and income support. Additionally, policing in the justice system, and community engagement and Black leadership. These are all extremely important areas of focus for us, which we have identified. On those specific themes themselves, we have come up with approximately 22 recommendations and devised 80 action plan items in order to address these particular areas. So we are working in terms of strengthening our concern relating to the issue of inequality and racism and systemic and racism and so on. And so the initiatives that we've taken also requires us to invest in the communities as well. So we've actually put monies into these particular initiatives. So it's not just putting these initiatives on a piece of paper. And so these steps are taken in order to address this particular issue, to make sure that we focus on equity, we focus on our diversity, and more importantly, though, inclusion. It's really important to recognize that inclusion is an important part of it, because it's one aspect to have what we presume to be equity, as well as the notion of diversity. But if it does not include the inclusionary piece, it doesn't allow for both social, economic, as well as justice development, in order to ensure that we have a seat at the table, and that the concerns that are being raised are being addressed. So there's a tremendous amount of work that's actually being done in order to strengthen the equity and diversity and the inclusion piece in the City of Toronto. It's backed by, not just in terms of investment, but also research is also a component part of it. And so we continue to focus our attention to create opportunities for all of our residents. Some of it including, of course, recruitment, hiring, promotion, training, as well as I mentioned about the investment, also mentoring for young Black individuals and so on, and creating a consistent environment where we can develop leadership in our community. Because in order to ensure that inclusions take place, we have to ensure that those who are mostly impacted by injustice and systemic racism and so on have a seat at the table, have a voice, and a strong voice. So these are some of the things that we're actually doing, and it is intended and hope that this will help in terms of creating transformative policy development opportunities in order to address a lot of the issues as it relates to anti-Black racism and systemic racism. And it helps us because we analyze all of this data, and we actually bring forward recommendations to continue to improve and ensure that the conditions that we're responding to are adjusted and so on. So those are some of the things that we're actually doing, Bruce.
Thank you so much, Michael, for sharing that insightful, transformative approach, and congratulate the city on having an anti-Black racism unit. And we stand as partners with you and the team at the city to ensure that we have transformative policies that engender well-being for all citizens, including Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So I go over to Charmaine. Welcome, Charmaine, the first Black woman to be elected to the Brampton City Council. Great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Good.
I'm honored. So, hello, everyone.
It's really a pleasure having you here, and we're honored. My question for you is, what are the initiatives that your city, in terms of when we think about your city, and how can we bring collective community into the equity and inclusion conversation? Because I know we're a diverse country, so we want to focus on equity and inclusion in conversation in our community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so how we can ensure community is included in public policy, and I think that's a really big area that I would like to speak to, is the public policy and then governing bodies. I think if the community understands why we're having specific problems and why we are hitting the barriers and the frustrations that we're hitting, when you understand why, then it will roadmap out how to get involved. And so as a municipal governing body, we make decisions on how people live and interact in their intimate community. Therefore, the community needs to ensure that the discussions that are being had, that their voice is included in those discussions, and that they are being made to yield the outcomes that are reflective of the community that we're living in. And so when the community understands that even the smallest changes can impact them greatly, they need to be involved, and we'll start to see shifts in the decision-making process and the bodies that are making the decisions. So how do we do this? And I think it's important for us to be educated on how government works at all levels, municipal, provincial, and federal, and who represents you. Sometimes the lack of participation comes down to not knowing where to go and who you need to contact, or understanding the process. So each level of government has people who represent you in your community, and you need to know who they are, because they are your community's representatives, and they are your voice. And if they are your voice and they are not speaking to the experiences and the frustrations that you're having, there's a problem. So community involvement, especially at a municipal level, can include sending letters of correspondence to the city clerk, or emailing your city councilor, or even emailing your MPs or MPPs and letting them know what your thoughts are on a certain topic that's coming to council. In Brampton, we at council meet every single Wednesday, and we have committee of council where we have discussions, read reports, and make preliminary discussions. And then the week after, we have council. And at council, all of those decisions that are made are ratified, which means they become bylaws. So you can attend those council meetings and you can delegate on issues that concern you in your community. And I'm a huge advocate for the community associations, because community associations help you organize and bring forth one clear voice on an issue. Also, fundraising and putting money towards campaigns that you're passionate about is very important. You need dollars in order to do these things. And finally, every 4 years, you got to vote. When the whole community votes, their individual votes combined can decide who represents them, who they want in, and who they want out. And so how can we ensure equity and inclusion is included within these governing bodies? Well, I think many government organizations are not diverse and they don't reflect the population that we serve. That's a fact. I think if you look at many of the boards, I'm the first Black woman elected to City Council in Brampton, and in 2018, and that takes a long time. And we only had 3 Black people, that includes me, ever sit at Brampton City Council, and we know how diverse Brampton is. We need to have that representation. So with all the conversation about diversity, equity, inclusion, it should now be impossible for many organizations and governing bodies to continue to keep their heads in the sand and not address their lack of equity and inclusion. And they must now take responsibility for not having even their staff reflect the populations they serve. So all governing bodies need to be genuinely committed to change, and we have to hold them accountable, including equity, inclusion, and inclusion policies, and just even the minutia, parks. We in Brampton, we having discussions about the plan that we're pushing back on to widen Williams Parkway into 6 lanes instead of 2, and as a community, we are involved in active transportation. So we need to be involved in some of these decisions. And we live in these areas that may be changed, have development. So we have to be a part of those tables. And so, I always look at groups like the Autism Coalition. They are large lobbying groups. And when we start looking at some of those strategies and really pooling our resources and coming together, we can have a lot of influence in some of the discussions and the outcomes. And, I think I said every 4 years we have to work towards those elections, and it can be done. I'm very confident it can be done. I myself am approaching a 3-year anniversary of a massive brain hemorrhage that happened 6 days after having my 5th baby. And after a hard-fought recovery, I told people that I wanted to run, and many said that I couldn't do it. So I registered. Many said that I wouldn't win, but here I am. And so I just feel the same strength and resilience that's in me is in all of us. Hard work pays off. So I'm really happy that we're having this discussion, because it's going to unlock some of the little minor things that we can do to see change. And that is getting the community organized and just reaching out to all of the people and starting to do those little tiny things like show up at council, to delegate, and sending letters. And so I unfortunately have a hard stop at 12 because we are going to be revealing a new park in Brampton called Emancipation Park. And the recent events that have elevated our understanding of anti-Black racism could not have been foreseen when I brought this initiative forward to council back in October, when I moved the motion. And I'm very proud to say that council voted unanimously for Brampton to have an Emancipation Park. And to my knowledge, it is the first one in Canada. So, and it's in the 9th largest city in Canada. So I hope everybody makes their way to Emancipation Park and shares their ideas and to say what they want to see there and how they want to have themselves represented there. So I'm going to be heading over to that historic event. But thank you so much. I am Charmaine Williams, City Councilor in Brampton, and I always welcome anybody's emails and conversations. And you can follow me on Instagram at charmom5.
Thank you so much, Charmaine.
Thank
And
you.
congratulations on the Emancipation Park and that initiative.
Thank
Kudos to everybody. That's, again, these discussions, every step counts, every single step, and much appreciated. So we're going to get to the next, thank you. And next, Christine Remedios of KPMG. I'm going to be asking Christine, how do we deal with anti-Black racism and racial bias in the corporate structure?
Yeah, good morning. Thank you, Bruce and Hugh, for having me here today. You know, gosh, I've been thinking about this quite a bit. We're in such extraordinary times right now, and I think for myself, kind of as a leader of an inclusion and diversity, as a mother of 2 young kids that live right downtown in the city of Toronto, it has been, I would say the last 6 weeks have been highly emotional, but also a great learning experience for me personally and professionally, I would say. But I think what it's also brought is a lot of opportunity to move things forward in a way that we couldn't have done before. Like many, I would say, corporate structures similar to us, so we're an organization, we're across Canada, 8,000 employees. We have a structure in place. We've got my role, we've got a budget, we've got a diversity council, we've got a CEO that's very engaged. We have talked about bias and inclusion for many years now, but we have not talked about racism. We have not talked about anti-Black racism. We have not talked about racial bias. And so what this has done now is it has brought this into the spotlight, and it has pushed us really to kind of take a step back and say that all the work we have done around, you know, advancing even people of color, has that been inclusive? Has that been equitable to the Black community and the Black employees in our firm? So it has really allowed us now to kind of look deeper into the work that we've done and leverage what we've built and move forward in a way that I think is more feasible. So what are we doing right now in a corporate structure to deal with this? One thing I would say is we are being very thoughtful in our approach. We want it to be long-term. We want it to be sustainable. It's not about making a donation. It's not about posting something on social media. And I would say our first starting point isn't to just build something, it's to sit back and listen. So one of the things that we've started to do is just open and create an environment for our Black employees in the firm to have a voice. So what are you currently experiencing in the workplace and outside the workplace that we need to understand and we need to kind of address? So that's number one. We've been spending a lot of time one-on-one conversations with our Black employees and with our Black professional network, really trying to understand what the experience is. The other thing that we've done is education. Education is key in order to move forward. So like I said, we've been educating on inclusion and bias, but have we actually talked about anti-Black racism? Have we actually kind of understood, and do our leaders understand what that looks like in the Canadian context? Because right now there's a huge spotlight on what's happening in the US, but it's happening here and it's happening in different ways. And so we've spent a lot of time with our leadership, our board, our council, our HR teams, in deep education over the last couple of weeks. The other thing that we've started to do that I think could happen in a corporate environment is take a look at our talent review processes. So what does that look like for diverse communities, but what does that really look like for the Black employees in our firm? We have over 3% of Black employees in our organization, and are they advancing? Right? Are they getting those promotion opportunities, development opportunities? So that's something that we're looking at. And I would say the other thing that we've been focused on as well is doing a reach out to the community. So who are some Black community organizations that we could actually have a deep partnership with, so we could start to grow talent, reach the high school level, and really start to mentor, sponsor talent that we could be bringing into the organization and helping advance their skills. So there's a number of things. So this is what I would say, is that there's not one thing that you could do. There's multiple things that need to be done in order to make change and to push things forward. And one of the things that I think is really important is to bring the Black community along with us. This is not something that we just take away and formalize and put in place. We have taken a very collaborative approach. We have a Black professional network in our firm, and we have built out a multi-year anti-Black racism strategy with them collaboratively. And so we're still in early days. We are still trying to figure this out, to be quite authentic and honest, but I think that there's great opportunity here for us to move forward and for us to do and really think about kind of where we are in our organizations that have had these structures for so long. Are they truly inclusive of our Black colleagues in our communities? And so I'll pause there, but I would say that there's multiple things that need to happen, especially in a corporate structure and in the business world. I think that we can collectively make a big difference to help move the dial forward.
Thank you so much, Christine, for that insightful perspective from the corporate lens. And we really, celebrate the initiatives and commend you and the team at KPMG Canada on the work you have been doing. The very best to you and the team. I'm excited to welcome Merle Africa, President of the Canadian Association of Urban Financial Professionals. Welcome, Merle.
Hi.
Hey,
thank you for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you. And my question for you are, it's focused on what are some of the impactful policy changes that can bring impact, to equity and access?
So I would definitely say that, given the environment that we're in today, we see that a lot of corporations and a lot of leaders are realizing, even though they've had diversity policies internally that they set up, they were very well intentioned when they were created. We're finding that, again, they've not been impactful with regards to the Black community, Indigenous community, as well as some other racialized groups. And obviously everybody now is at a point of reflection and starting to think about, okay, how do we change this a little bit more? How do we make corporate Canada a lot more equitable for everybody? Because what we've seen in the past is always almost like a glass ceiling for Black professionals. And so a lot of the policies that we want to see enacted today is really around some of the pledges that some of these corporations are making, right? So yes, you made a pledge that you're going to increase employee mobility. Yes, you're actually going to try to get folks into, senior executive positions or try to get them on boards. That is great. But how do you enact policy that actually creates that? How are you going to be able to come out and sort of put out those numbers, put out those stats, especially when those stats are not great. Companies don't really like to put out information that doesn't make them look good, right? And so we're gonna need, I feel like, we need government to create some form of policy or legislation around having companies sort of release data and comply to some of these things, but as well as for the companies to create their own internal policies. And what that also means ensuring that the people who are creating these mandates are also empowered. So, having them roll up into the C-suite, ensuring that your employee resources groups are actually empowered so that they're not just given a small budget of, say, $5,000, but they're given an actual big budget, they're given KPIs, they're also held accountable to ensure that they're doing what they need to do on their part to enact some of these and engage with the workforce. But ultimately, it's going to come down to the companies to put together something internally and hopefully publish those policies publicly so that you as a consumer that's watching right now who either has an investment or either banks or in some way, consumes from these companies can actually hold them accountable.
Very, very insightful. Thank you so much, Merle, for that. I know want to just turn over to our moderator, Sharon.
Thank you, Hugh. Thank you, everyone. And thanks so much to all our wonderful panel of thought leaders who came out and, shared your perspective on and your insights on government and community. It's awesome. You know, we're getting a lot of feed from the panel here, and I just wanted, so in interest of time, I'll get right into it. There's a question here from Nicole Smith, and she made the point that there's research that suggests that for a diverse population to have a voice, they must have at least 30% representation. And her question is, how do we intentionally increase numbers and ensure inclusion? So it's not just about numbers, but also having a seat at the table with a voice that can add it to the decisions made. I don't know if Deputy Mayor Thompson, you might want to take that on, or perhaps Charmaine.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. And I'll take a stab at it. I think, you know, there's two component part to this question, I believe. One is around those who are elected, so an elected official. And, you know, in the city of Toronto, where over 50% is diverse, reflectively on the city government, I am the only person that looks like me, which is Black. And then there are perhaps 2 or 3 that are Asian. We have a council that consists of about 25 council members and 1 mayor. And so you can do the math and you realize that representation is not there. And so part of that, obviously, we go through an election process, which you know, Charmaine spoke about earlier. But I think an area where we really need to emphasize and focus attention, it is with respect to the people being involved in specific issues and policy concerns. That is, you know, you show up to meetings, you voice your concerns, you do write letters to ensure that your concerns are addressed and that they're dealt with, not just simply being placated and so on. And so while we may not see the electoral representation that reflects the city in terms of Toronto being, you know, over 50% diverse, but the fact of the matter is that you could still affect policy changes and policy reform in conjunction with respect to not having a diverse council. Clearly, a diverse council is a better council because not only do you get better ideas and thoughts and the leadership that comes from that, the fact of the matter is that oftentimes we think of racism and the effects or the ineffect of it as just simply that someone is, you know, basically willfully and intentionally trying to affect your progress. Sometimes it's as simply as that you're not at the table. People are looking out for their own interests and not your interest per se. And so it's not considered with respect to your concern. And so is that defined as being racist or racism? Or is it because the fact that we don't make enough noise to ensure that our concerns are addressed as part of the process? But as I said earlier, I think it's always best to have representation. It's really important to be able to understand what you feel and what you're talking about, because it's quite different for someone else to actually try to emulate or to express a feeling about some other groups, because no matter how you may think it, as Bob Marley has stated time and time again, he who feels it the most knows it the best. So in as much as you may think you know, you really don't know until you're actually, you know, walking a mile in that person's shoes, so to speak. So there's a lot of work to be done. And then the final point I'd like to make, as you know, politics is, it takes time. And there's a real requirement to really be engaged. I have personally worked to help young people to be engaged in the political system. Oftentimes, some have basically retreated because it does take time. You have to build your network. You have to build your relationship. You have to look at financial support. You have to really commit yourself to the purpose. And oftentimes, a lot of folks will come forward just as the election is called and are ready to run. And the expectation is that because I'm diverse, I should then have an opportunity. It doesn't work that way, even with respect to those parties who claim to really be, top shelf in terms of their focus and making sure that diversity expanded into the political arena. The fact of the matter is that when the opportunity comes to bring diverse candidates up, you find that they too will actually suppress those diverse candidates so that other candidates who fits the norm will actually run. And so we don't get the representation that we actually need. And it's extremely important. And so unless we have a system that, you know, allocates a certain number of people of color and so on who are going to be elected, and I don't think that system will come. Quite frankly, we still have to go through a process in order to put the time and effort in, the work in order to get elected. My overnight success took me almost 25 years.
Wow. Thank you so much, Deputy Mayor. That was really insightful. You know, good points you've made there. Charmaine, another question came in, and perhaps it might have been more suited to Michael Thompson, but because you haven't, I'm going to ask it to you. It came to me privately from Michelle. What are some specific tips to address the government for intersectionality that comes with BIPOC into government, and also intersecting with the LGBTQIA, two-spirited and neurodiverse, and with physical disabilities? So it's very multi-pronged right here. I'm not sure if you have a perspective on that you'd like to share.
Mm-hmm. You know, I appreciate the question, and I was kind of looking over it as well. And I think, you know, as long as we are making sure, like I said, our voice on council and in government, we are just the talking heads to reflect the messages and the concerns of our community. And so if there are communities that are not feeling represented, you have to make sure that you are reaching out to your elected officials to say, hey, this is a concern for our area and our community, and how are you going to be able to relay that during your council meetings and when you're making decisions and policies. And so the best way is to reach out. And to echo what Deputy Mayor Thompson was saying, you know, if you are there and you're present and you're constantly in the faces, you can't be ignored. And I think we have, especially in Brampton, when you look at the Black African Caribbean community, there are almost 100,000, if not more, of us here in the city. And you know, imagine the movement that would happen if all of us became involved and became active. We could change the face of our council. Absolutely. And so I always encourage, especially our young ones, because before becoming a city councilor, I was I worked in children's mental health for almost 20 years, and as a certified multisystemic therapist and behavioral consultant, working for a number of the top children's mental health organizations here in Peel and Halton region. And so when it comes to our young people, I always encourage them from an early age to speak up and raise their voice and become involved, whether it's volunteering for different campaigns. And as my Deputy Mayor Thompson, you know, saying, not just during the election, it's through the whole entire term. I'm always looking for volunteers. I love to have young people in my office just to see the operations and how things are working. Because, you know, getting into politics, you realize that is where decisions are being made. Funding comes down based on the decisions that are happening at a provincial level, even at a municipal level. We decide, you know, which organizations we want to partner with to have certain initiatives to reach the community. So if you have ideas and initiatives that you're working on, you know, don't be frustrated by the circle that you get into. Reach outside of that and contact your elected officials and say, hey, this is important to me. And because it's important to me, I know it's important to many. Whether you're bringing a petition forward, whether you're bringing correspondence and letters for, you just have to bring it. And so I sent my email, and I always encourage, please contact me, reach out to me, because if I'm talking just about myself and saying what I want to see, that's a problem. That's a problem. It should be, this is what the community is saying to me, and that is why I'm bringing this forward.
That's right, Charmaine. You have a very good point. We need to reach out, and we need to engage our politicians, folks. We need to engage the persons who are representing us. Mm-hmm. There's a point here, Christine M made a point about that corporations need to understand the impact of anti-racism and the benefit of EDI. You know, the bottom line, it impacts your revenue and can be directly linked to performance reviews and stuff like that. So I have a question for you that's linked to that. how can we foster strategies and ensure EDI initiatives are successful? What are your thoughts around that?
Thank you, Sharon. I mean, in terms of ensuring these are successful and we actually make progress, there are a number of things that I've just learned over the years, and I know going in with our strategy that need to be in place. So one is we need leadership commitment, right? If inclusion and diversity, for those of you that might have a structure in your organizations, if they're not built into your CEO strategy, if it's just a side at the desk for a number of people, it's not going to be successful. There has to be real commitment to make change. And so I would say I have spent a lot of time at our leadership table over the last 6 weeks, working through this strategy, getting their commitment, understanding what our priorities are so that everybody is engaged in moving forward. So that's number one, leadership commitment in terms of ensuring their things are successful. The other thing is bringing people along with me. So for those who are in a diversity and equity role, you know, we don't own a lot of the processes that we are trying to influence and change. I don't own our talent management processes. I don't own recruiting. I don't own our promotion process. So it's bringing people along, the leaders of our HR leadership team, our recruiting team, to understand what we're trying to do to move forward, understand what our data looks like, what our representation looks like. So it's really key that this is a collaborative move forward. It's not just me as the inclusion and diversity leader trying to make change in the organization. So I would say that's another big piece. The other thing is data and metrics. I think I saw somebody post something here that, you know, what gets measured gets done, and that is absolutely correct. I think that a big part of the role we have in our team is, one, understanding the demographics of Canada. So we're a Canadian-wide organization. So what does the population look like across Canada? We need to understand we have a lot of new immigrants coming into the country. We have a lot of women in our country. So is our firm actually representative of the Canadian marketplace? That data is key. And then measuring, are we hiring that demographic? Are they advancing in our firm? Are they making partner in our firm? These are all the things that we track to ensure that we are being successful as we move forward. And then I would think the last piece in terms of our success is asking our employees, right? So we have an engagement survey, and our engagement survey and our Black Professional Network will be part of that, is to say, how are you feeling as we move forward with this strategy? Are you feeling a difference? Are you feeling change? Are you feeling like you have more opportunity than you did before? So I think that there are multiple things in terms of ensuring success. It's not just putting a strategy on a paper, and it's not going to happen in a few months. It's going to take time, but I think those would be the key things that I would kind of put forward for people to think about.
Thank you so much, Christine. You were frozen most of the time, but miraculously we could hear you. So.
Could you hear me? Okay, good.
People might have been wondering who was speaking, but that's Christine from KPMG, or Diversity Specialist. I'm going to squeeze in, there's a question here about policing, but I'm going to quickly squeeze in a question to Meryl Africa before. Meryl, can you highlight an innovative program that has helped to increase Black talent pipelines, and what kind of educational opportunities have you offered to help foster professional growth? You know.
Yeah, so within Canada, so CAUFP, the firm that, the nonprofit I represent, we work with many of the banks and many of the financial institutions and corporations across Canada. Canada is very far behind. They're not doing a very good job in terms of, like I said, well-intentioned, but in terms of when it comes to the Black community, we can see that translating to the numbers, that folks are not moving ahead, and ERGs are not empowered. And so one of the banks that is doing a really good job is TD. So TD has a very a strategic mandate in the way that they partner with a lot of organizations and nonprofits outside of their bank. So we're one of them, for example, when it comes to helping them to create pipeline of talent, from early talent as well as at the executive level, as well as internally. They have mentorship programs, they have strategic mandates, they empower their lines of businesses to invest in the community, and I think they are probably a great example of all the banks right now that are doing a good job. But I think that corporate Canada can really look to some of what the firms are doing down south in the US with regards to how they're really working to mobilize some of their Black employees and what they're doing in terms of financial investment, in terms of the community that they build around support for ensuring that they get the top performing talent that is Black or from other racialized groups. And once they get into the firms, what they're doing to try and empower them in terms of fair pay, in terms of mentorship, in terms of all of those things so that they are set up for success from day one. And so a lot of the programming that CAUFP does, for those who are not a member, feel free to shoot me a message on LinkedIn. But our website is caufp.ca. We do a lot of thought leadership events. We do professional development where we focus on both the technical skills that you need to learn, but also more so, which is more important, is the soft skills. Because for a lot of Black people, one of the problems that we have is not understanding how to communicate ourselves, how to communicate our brand, and how to interview better. Because when you are, for example, a manager and you're trying to get to a director level type job, or when you're at that director level and you're going for a VP or an SVP job, there is a different way in which you need to communicate yourself and brand yourself. So those are types of programming that we offer, because we help folks to understand what's not written on the job description, what is unsaid, so that they can position themselves to be a really powerful candidate when they're going through that interview process.
Good points, Mara. Thank you so much. Deputy Mayor Thompson, there's just one question I wanted to squeeze in, just one last question, guys. Is there any suggestion on how police organizations can move forward to combat racism? I just wanted to get this one last in before we're almost on time.
Yes,
any
yes,
work
thank
being
you.
done in this area that someone can, recommend is a good model? That's coming from Kamal.
Yes, thank you very much for that. There's obviously a lot of work that continues to happen in this area. And of course, in as much as we work to move the dial, sometimes every inch forward goes back 2 or 3 inches backwards. And so I think what needs to happen, though, it's a combination of things, right, in terms of the vigilance of the public in general. Great thing to have cell phones now, because they're really a device that actually helps us in understanding relationship and so on. But also in terms of holding police boards accountable, so those members accountable, changing some of the provincial, and specifically in Ontario, some of the rules as it relates to how governance takes place. The boards themselves, when they direct the chief to direct the officers themselves, because the board itself cannot direct the police officers directly, that those policies are followed through and carried out and so on. But at the same time, to ensure that government leaders are accountable in terms of the decisions that they make or the lack thereof. I think it's important to understand, one of the groups that holds the most power within policing is actually not government. It's actually not police service board. It's actually police association and their leadership. Most people may not realize this, but they can actually decide to hold their services back. They can actually affect municipalities in terms of resources that they generate, because they collect a lot of money through the fines and so on. And they can then decide whether or not they want to adhere to policy directive. And the system gets confounded with respect to these irregularities that occurs in the system. So key elements you have to monitor. When you put policies in place, you have to ensure that the policies are dealt with. And at the same time, you also have to look at how you train police officers, not in a militaristic approach, but in a more humane approach, as well as the types of things that police do. There are a vast array of things that they're asked to do that they're actually ill-qualified to actually do, and they do them poorly. And when they do them poorly, the outcomes, the George Floyds and many others we see, sometimes in front of us, others we don't see at all, but we hear about them. Breonna Taylor and all the things that tends to happen. And while we may think that a lot of these things only happen exclusively in the United States, they happen right here in our own country of Canada. And it's really important that we have to do more. And if I can just say, maybe because it's the last opportunity I may get to comment, I want to really thank certainly the organizers of this, because I've actually swiped through and seen all the people that are on here. By the way, 2 of my favorite people are actually on this program. That's Wendy Coquier and Tanya Lee Williams, 2 of my favorite people. I just love these people so much. I've worked with Wendy over the years. She's just been terrific. Tanya, the same thing. When I brought Tanya Lee Williams to my community, and she's always been famous, she was such a joy. And so I give you that in terms of human interaction and relationship. That's what we need more from the policing sector, but also at the same time, we need to ensure that we actually watch what they do, put in place actions to implement changes, and ensure that the changes that we put in place, the actions that we take that are taken, are actually true actions that actually bring about the changes. And I can just do one bit of plug myself. You can find me on Instagram at counselor_Thompson and on Twitter at Thompson_37. And my website is www.counselorthompson.com.
Thank you. Thanks for making
You're
yourself accessible. We need that. Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone. I'll hand over now to Bruce.
I want to thank you very much. Thank you for those kind words at the end, Michael. That was very inspirational.
Yeah.
Very, very, very kind and very, very appreciative. And we want to thank you, Sharon, for doing the Q&A. It's not an easy job sometimes. You got to sift through all those questions, which is great.
Unfortunately, we missed some of them, but you know, it's time.
Next one we'll have a full day one. Okay. And I want to thank specifically Charmaine, Merle, Christine, and Michael for their contribution and for their leadership today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Now, we're going to jump to the next session, which is we're very excited about our Voices of Humanity. So we're going to introduce Tanya Williams. Tanya Williams is the executive director of Real World Film Festival, who'll be discussing diversity in the film. But before we get to diversity in the film, we'd love to tell you about Tanya. Tanya is a two-time Emmy-nominated individual, a two-time NAACP Image winner. She's an actress. She's a producer. Again, founder and executive director of Real World Film Festival, founder of the Real World Screen Institute, now in its 20th year, a preeminent organization creating access opportunity for professional development for Canadian Black, Indigenous, Asian, South Asian, Middle Eastern, and Latin screen-based professionals. Recently, Real World launched a comprehensive national database for racially diverse creatives called Access Real World. So for the last 10 years, Tanya also for 10 years, from 1990 to 2009, if everybody likes soap operas, okay, she was famous for her starring role as Dr. Olivier Barber on the hit daytime soap opera, The Young and the Restless.
You can tell Bruce has never seen it.
I've never seen it. But
I know Oliver Hastings,
Olivier.
right?
Okay. I used to, well, anyways. Tanya, thank you so much and welcome. So we're going to talk about the insights, and what can you tell us about? You have this report, the major. I guess share the major highlights and just tell your story and share the major highlights. What are you working on right now? What's the initiative? And please share with everybody. And I think it's fabulous what you're doing. Thank you.
Well, we only have 7 minutes. So I'll at least start with, thank you so much for having me here. I love being in these kinds of groups because these kinds of groups are not connected to the entertainment industry in any way and actually don't even know how every single thing they do is connected to the entertainment industry. So that's my favorite thing to do. When you're sitting here speaking about how can we do this, how can we change this, how can we connect with more people, that is what the entertainment industry does. So I live in Los Angeles, that's where I am right now, and Hollywood is key to Washington. The two are one. And I started my career in Toronto in the late 70s, I think like 76, 77. And one of the things that to this day that I've never understood is Canada does not understand the viable financial and important value of television and film and the screen-based industries in the way that they do in the US. So when you are struggling to get your messages across, you are struggling because you have no connection to the people in the industry that are the communicators of the country. The reason we're even having this dialogue now and why people have been having this dialogue for the last 3 months is because an almost 9-minute video That's what made the difference. Of George Floyd, an almost 9-minute. So you could have talked about this in Parliament. You could have talked about this in your corporate offices. You could have talked about it till you're blue in the face. But an almost 9-minute video galvanized the world. And that is the power of the screens. So all the things that you are talking about, you need to learn and understand the Canadian entertainment industry and the business and what everyone in that industry is trying to do, that will help and activate everything that you're all trying to do. So keeping that in, one of the people said today that statistics is everything. We have not been collecting statistics in terms of the screen-based industry. And when I talk about the screen-based industry, I'm talking about funding, which primarily comes from Heritage, Telefilm, Canada, Canadian Media Fund. These are key organizations that pretty much every Canadian film you watch, every television show you see has been funded in some way by these agencies. Our push is that these agencies are not collecting statistics and data which will create the changes that we need to create more funding, especially, and here's what I don't like, so I won't be saying it, especially when we talk about just diversity, which is a word that means nothing, which is saying BIPOC, a word I hate that means nothing. We have got to understand that we have to break people down into their separate ethnicities, and each one of those ethnicities are facing challenges and barriers that are completely different. And the problem I've seen is, especially from government agencies, they are collecting what they call just diversity numbers, but that doesn't really mean anything. We need to know in the industry, how are Black creators and Black people faring in our industry and in every industry. We need to know how the Indigenous people are faring and working in this industry. We need to know how Asian people, Canadian Asians, are working and faring in not just our industry, but in every industry. The same with the South Asian community, the Middle Eastern community, and with the Latin American community. We need separate data for each one of these, because what a lot of agencies like to do is they create this one word, diversity. They say, oh, we have 51% diversity. That shouldn't mean anything to you. You shouldn't applaud it or get excited about it, because diversity is pretty much everyone that is not a white, straight Christian man. So white women are part of diversity. Anyone who has a language barrier is considered part of diversity. People with physical challenges are part of diversity. When you put everyone in the same basket, it means that none of the individual groups are getting served. So in our study, we focus specifically, by the way, go to realworld.ca and you can sign up there to receive the study yourself. And we just completed it in January of this year. We just released it a couple of months ago. And we focused on English Canada only because it's a whole other, we want to do the Montreal side, but Quebec is a whole other beast unto itself that needs to be done as well, because they're struggling more than English side is struggling, by the way, in terms of Black representation and Indigenous and people of color. But on the English side, we started there and we focused just on screen-based industries. And when you think of the screen-based industries, people who are not in the industry are thinking, oh, actors and directors and writers maybe and producers. But because I work in the industry, there are hundreds of categories, from set medic to tutors to catering companies to hair and makeup to incredibly lucrative jobs. Because whenever you watch a TV show, whenever you watch a movie, you'll see 15 minutes of credits after a movie and 15 minutes of hundreds of people, from drivers to location managers. These are great lucrative jobs that more people of color need to get into, and they're not, because everyone keeps thinking the entertainment industry are actors and producers and directors and writers, but they're carpenters and construction people. So let's think about that too when we're thinking about creating more jobs for people. So within our study, we went across, we put out a survey. We worked with a company that was a communications company that organized the survey and put the statistics in. And it's really one of the first statistics we have. And one of the things I learned from doing the survey is how bad our data is. how poor it was to try and get some of the numbers. Just this week I was in, because I'm executive director of Real World, I get the opportunity to sit on a lot of organizations that are screen-based. So I sit on a committee with Telefilm called Inclusion and Diversity. And one of my first suggestions is you need to separate that out. We need a Black committee, we need an Asian committee. So that was one of the first things we're working on. But we were looking at how they collect, how funding goes out. I mean, we know that money drives everything. These are the tax dollars that are collected from every Canadian citizen, so they should be representative of every Canadian citizen. So we like to know how much budget does Heritage give Telefilm Canada, and then how much is that distributed out? But currently the way Telefilm, and I'm not pointing a finger at them, it's the way Canadian Media Fund, it's the way every government agency is collecting data right now. They collect it by Indigenous, so we know those numbers, and then they put everyone else as racial diversity. So we don't actually know who in that group of racial diversity is accessing what. My temperature, meaning that I've run a film festival now for 20 years, my temperature is that the Black community in particular, that community is getting the least amount of the funding. And I only say that because I can tell by the submissions of films that are coming in. And every year, when we started the festival in 2001, we would get a lot of Black content. There wasn't as many Asians and South Asians and Middle East and Latin American people in the community of the film industry yet. But that has grown exponentially, I would say, in the last 20 years. And the pie, I doubt the pie has gotten any bigger in terms of funding people of color. So now more people are trying to get that small piece of the pie. And in the study, that's what we noticed, that people were complaining that they're applying for things, they can't get any kind of funding. And I know there's a part of people outside of the industry who thinks, well, why does the government need to fund these things anyway? You know, why do you need to be funding? Well, the UK funds all the projects you see out of there. Australia funds all the projects you see out of there. You can't compare Canada to the United States. We're not working with 350 million people. We're not, the population of Canada alone could be just the Black population in America. So you must look at the countries that are getting government funding, and that should reap back benefits financially, because that's what it does. When you see what the BBC has done with their government funding, when you see stars like Idris Elba, you know, coming out with Luther, these are internationally successful shows, and those shows give you a slice. In fact, I just saw something on Showtime this week. It's a new series with 2 Black leads in it. It's called Together We Hunt, or something like that. It's a serial killer sci-fi mystery. But this is sending the world a message about what the UK is made up of. We all know that the UK have a lot of Black people, they have a lot of Middle East people, they have a lot of South Asian, and we know that because we watch their films and television shows. I can guarantee you, you travel the world, and even though we keep bragging about the diversity in Canada, people are unaware of it because our films and our TV shows that go internationally do not reflect that. And so I hear all the time when I'm traveling and I say I'm Canadian, they are shocked. They've never met anyone Black from Canada. You don't hear that when people talk about the UK. Everybody knows that. So I don't understand why we shouldn't be investing in that concept of people of color in the film and movies because we're helping out, or we think poor little people, they need a helping hand. We should be investing in it because it's actually good financial sense to do that. We would sell more international programming if we did those kind of things. So we're not focused in a business way that I would love to see the industry in Canada focus. And part of what the survey was talking about was, I would say the report reflected was not only that we don't have enough data collection, that was key to what it was, but that we don't know how the funding is currently spread out among. So we need to count that so that we can know if we need to change that. That's another one. And that we should be looking to how, especially the UK and Australia, have devised incentives for production companies to use more people of color. They have a game plan that's clearly worked really well because we've seen, especially with the BBC, they did something very specific in the last 15 years, and we're seeing the rewards of that now. There isn't another country, well, outside of an African country, that has more international stars that are Black than they have in the UK. And that was a very conscious decision and a plan and a strategy that the BBC did. And when that happens, it becomes like a domino effect. It impacts politics. It will impact sort of the corporate world. You're talking about board of directors. When you start seeing things in film and TV, that opens up people's awareness. We also have to be conscious about the content. That was something that came out of the study too. Just having more content is not enough. You have to have quality content. We don't want to have content that continues to stereotype Black people, Indigenous people. That is not helpful either. So we always need to, there needs to be some sort of a, I don't even know how you would do this, but through the broadcasters themselves, you need to have some sort of quality control almost, that you're not sort of seeing the same negative stereotypes being perpetuated to the public, because that's not also helpful to the shifts and the changes and the growth that we want to happen in Canada right now. So I do encourage people to look at the report. One of the things that came out of the report that I sit on it's called the Black Leaders Group with the Canadian Media Fund. And one of the things we now want to do, you may not be aware of this, but there is an Indigenous Screen Office. So an office was created 3 years ago, and that has impacted the Indigenous community in a very positive way, creating more content for them. So we would like a Black Screen Office. We have now spoken to Heritage Minister about this. We've spoken to Telefilm, the Canadian Media Fund. We're now going to private corporate industries about this. But I think this will make a dramatic change to all the things that I'm talking about right there. When there is one collective agency, which will be the Black Screen Office, who will speak to Ottawa and the rest of the world internationally about what we have to offer. One of the things that came out of the study was the reason we created, it's called accessrealworld.ca. So if you go to accessrealworld.ca, you'll see it as the first national database specifically for Canadians who are Black, Indigenous, and as I said, all people of color in the screen industry. The complaint we hear before from production companies is, we don't know where the talent is, we don't know where they are, we can't find them. We understood that. If that's a problem, then we find a solution to that problem. So now with accessrealworld.ca, we hope all of you on here are going to promote that, because it only works if people sign up. So people have to sign up, because we now are partnered Access Real World with the Writers Guild, the Directors Guild, the Canadian Academy, the CMPA, which is the Canadian Media Producers Association, ACTRA. I'm probably even leaving IATSE, NABET. We are together with Telefilm and CMF and Ontario Creates and BC Creates. We are all together supporting this platform. So let's make sure that we get the word out, that we get the talent on there, and then let's promote to those production companies to use that. And I'm hopeful that in the next 2 to 5 years, we want to see changes. We need to be creating, when you create a star system, I always find that funny, that's in the study as well. Creating a star system is not because actors are egocentric or we just want to see our faces on things. You create a star system, which speaks to what Councillor Thompson, is a councillor, I'm probably getting the wrong, Michael Thompson had said, community engagement starts with the people that people know. Nobody rushes to see a movie or rushes to see a television show because of the directors and the writers. You know, regular people don't do that. They go because, oh, Idris Elba is in there, or somebody, Archie Punjab is there. They're going to see those actors. We have not created any kind of stars in Canada, and certainly not people of color. There's nobody here that can name 5 Black actors, I'm sure. When you have the strength of actors that people recognize, you then can build community engagement, because any one of those actors turning up at any one of your events creates a larger public presence. And when they say something, it's a larger platform that they get to speak from. It's not by accident that you see that a lot of people who have been in Hollywood sometimes end up being politicians too, because you already have that audience. You've already created that communication and that engagement. So let's take advantage of that. We have some phenomenal actors in Canada who are doing really well, but they're not connected to any of you. You're not creating your relationships with them. And part of that came out of the study as well. There's a real disconnect between corporate politics. Someone in the chat had sent a really amazing, I'm sure everybody downloaded it, Diversity Leads a report. And in that report, I see that they've actually created this, there's buckets of things that they focus on. And what I don't see there is the entertainment industry in their buckets at all. They're talking corporate, voluntary, education, hospitals, ABCs, and yet the largest one on there should have been entertainment. We've got to get out of that thinking that that is a little hobby thing that people who are flighty do for fun. It's not, it's a big business. And in the US, they appreciate the fact that Hollywood probably brings in more money for all of the US than any of the other industries that exist here whatsoever. So we're not even started to scrape or tap into the potential of the Canadian entertainment industry yet. I can always talk for 2 hours, but you know, I'll just stop there.
Okay, hey, Tanya, I tell you, that was extremely insightful. And I tell you, it was an eye opener. Okay, if that's something like really, very powerful, very insightful.
Well, some of the industries that I'm very frustrated about right now are agents and managers and casting directors. There is almost zero visibility. There's almost no people of color whatsoever in these areas. And we have to get out of the mind of thinking filmmakers should be producers too. Producers in Hollywood, producers are people that they steal from Wall Street and they steal from Washington, lobbyists, they steal all kinds of people. They don't expect the creatives who are writing the scripts and shooting the movies to also be the producers. And we're not cultivating strong producers, people of color. We should be going into where there are law schools. Let's find out who are those Black entertainment lawyers, who are those Indigenous people of color, and get them understanding that the entertainment industry is a business and that they need to be there leveraging and helping the creatives in that industry.
100%, 100%. Tanya, thank you so much. Thank you for your leadership. That was really, really tremendous. Now we're going to start the next segment. I'm going to hand it over to Hugh, who's going to lead the next segment, which is Hugh. You want to just you're running with this now.
Yeah, thank you, Bruce. I'm really happy to welcome and introduce our panel, Lorian Thomas, President of the Canadian Association of Black Lawyers, Nadine Spencer, President of the Black Business Professional Association, and Dr. Wendy Sukie from the Diversity Institute. She's the Academic Director and Associate and a Professor at Ryerson University, Ted Rogers School of Management, and Chris Noakes, Indigenous Community Advocate. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
I want to ask you, Lori, first, what are some of the key challenges currently being faced by Black lawyers in your organization as we've really focused this panel discussion on business and community? Thank you.
Yes, so I equate law almost like business back in the 90s, maybe the late 80s. We're just getting out of using faxes, but only because of COVID. So that can kind of give you an idea where we are in terms of treating Black persons and people of color in the legal industry. We have still overt and subtle issues with discrimination. We have issues where our members are not part of kind of the networks that were already pre-generated. So if you think of lawyers, usually people think of a lineage of families, people who have been in law for a number of years, and that doesn't necessarily apply to Black lawyers or other persons of color, certainly Indigenous as well. We also have a lack of mentorship, and one of the things that's important is that the mentorship come from within our community, but from also outside of our community. We really need active mentorship. So people who are really kind of prepared to refer work, to assist with those who are starting out, And we need the good foundation for jobs. And so one of the things that we notice is that our members, certainly people of color, have difficulty just getting the first bits of foundation. And with law, it really is a long game. So you really want to start off with a good articling position, good school that you go to, and that will kind of dictate almost your path. And if you don't have those initial foundations, you're going to struggle to kind of be treated equal. You're already starting from behind, because anytime that you stand out and you don't represent the majority, you're starting from behind the starting line, is the way I like to put it. And so you're just trying to catch up. And then if you don't get those opportunities, if you don't get that inclusion, then it's a problem. And so we have issues where people will go for jobs and they are not, quote unquote, the right fit, because a lot of the times people hire based on who fits the mold, who do you feel comfortable with. A lot of it in law is comfortability. We work long hours, and so we hire people who are like us. And if diverse people are not in the hiring pool, then diverse people don't get hired. And that becomes a bigger problem when somebody is internationally trained or has an accent, or English is not their first language. They become othered constantly. So that's a real issue that we have. And then we have a pipeline, just a general pipeline, which is we're not really represented well in the numbers at law school. And then those numbers, the attrition continues exponentially as you go into the legal profession. And so when you look at lawyers who are 20 years out, you don't see the same numbers you see at what we call our call to the bar ceremony, where you see a lot of people of color, a lot of diversity, but it starts to go away years on end. And then when you look at various check marks in what we would say is successful in law, looking at the judiciary, looking at partners on Bay Street, looking at partners in firms, high-level positions in the government, you don't see the diversity that you should, because they're really not getting the ability or the opportunity, even though they are just as qualified, if not sometimes more, because they work so hard. So those are probably kind of some of the main issues, is just the lack of mentorship, the lack of and the presence of discrimination. You're on mute, Hugh.
Thank you so much, Lori, for sharing that. And it's interesting that as we move the dial forward, more collaboration and cooperation is important across all diverse groups to make this happen for home and native land and professionals across the board. I invite Nadine Spencer, welcome, to answer the question: how can professionals, how as a professional organization, how can we ensure access to existing and emerging opportunities? Nadine, over to you. Welcome. Nadine? Okay. So while
I'm here.
Allow Nadine to come on screen. Yes, right.
Here.
Good.
Can you hear me as well?
I'm hearing you now. Yes.
Great, thank you. So can you just repeat your question again, Hugh?
So how can we ensure access to existing and emerging opportunities for Black professionals?
So, when we look at the programs that we have existing at the BBPA, we look at nuances of the opportunities. So I want to start there a little bit in terms of a background at how we look at race and the nuances to build innovative programs and opportunities for Black businesses. So I say, why now? Why all of a sudden has the world recognized, that Black Lives Matter? Why all of a sudden, the Black community has had, I say, the proverbial knee on our necks for many years, whether it's lack of access to capital, it's lack of access in C-suites, it's being at the table. And so part of what we look at is, how race has played a way for access and getting to the opportunities that you talk about. You know, I've sort of, you know, lived my life as an entrepreneur, creating opportunities for Black people through education. But when you look at me, what do you see? You see a Black woman. And by societal norms, when you see these are two disadvantaged groups. And so we must look at opportunities from an empowered perspective, and we're working to empower our community. And the Black Business and Professional Association, where I am the president, has been directly involved in empowering our community and finding opportunities to empower our community. You know, we work to ensure access to existing and emerging opportunities for people that look like you and me, you know, and Tanya and Mike and Deputy Mayor Thompson, because we have been missing a lot in that space over the last 400 years and continue to as well. And a little bit about the Black Business and Professional Association. We've been around for 37 years, same age as me, working to, you know, create economic opportunity, address equity for Black business professionals in our community. And the opportunities and how we prepare our members is through our programs. We build our programs through what I call a cultural lens and nuance lens. Tanya talked about how content is done. You know, how are we having inclusivity in terms of equity and race in content? You know, part of what an organization that I work with in my company called Brandy Q Black, we work in the creative space of marketing and advertising, and we look at the race lens through comms and marketing. And so we find it's important to prepare our Black business professionals for opportunities by being prepared in the context of looking at race and equity through that content lens. And so our programs prepare our business members and all community members for that. You know, I did want to highlight, you know, we have many programs. We have Ask the Professionals, we have financial literacy. And the key thing that I want to state in the financial literacy program we start with Black youth, because they say it's important we start young, and then we build to the professionals and of course the businesses. You know, Personal Finance Index, the PFIN Index measures 8 key areas of personal finance: knowledge, earning, consuming, saving, investing, borrowing, managing debt, ensuring comprehensive risk and uncertainty into the go-to sources. But according to a report, it showed that 38% of this index questions were answered appropriately for Black business people versus 55% to white business people. So you can see the difference. If we're not understanding the core of what it is to succeed in business, to have that sustainable economy, we're not going to be prepared. So our programs work to do this. And, you know, last but not least, I do want to plug, we do have a program starting up. It's called, in partnership with the Diversity Institute and the Women Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub. Wendy Suke is here. She's an absolutely awesome partner. But, you know, we have a program, it's called Boss Women Entrepreneurship Training Program, because we recognize that, you know, I stated, you know, Black and woman, it's two different perspectives that we have to consider. And so this program, it prepares Black women entrepreneurs for success in businesses, looking at 8 different things. So these are the opportunities we create for our members to prepare us for a strong future, a strong, sustainable future that I called, you know, we work on our companies being bankable, and it starts from that strong financial foundation.
Thank you so much, Nadine. I love that. And, you know, the partnerships really create that response to how we have access for Black professionals in the corporate and other spaces. So thank you and commend you and the team at BBPA on the work and the partnerships you're creating. I'm turning over to, of course, Wendy Suke, who is with the Diversity Institute at Ryerson University. And Wendy, welcome to the conversation. My question for you, how do we create meaning and impact in addressing equity, diversity, and inclusion for BIPOC communities in Canada?
Thanks so much. And there are a lot of people to thank around the virtual room, but I'll try to keep to my 5 minutes. So I'll just say thanks to all of you who have helped us work, and you know who you are. So I wanted to start with just three points about the study. Diversity Institute tends to focus on what are called designated groups in Canada. So women, persons with disabilities, Indigenous people, and racialized people. But we also have done deep dives into, for example, the Black Experience Project. We've done a lot of work looking at Muslims because they are very much targets of bias, as well as the LGBTQ2+ community. So we take a diverse lens on the notion of diversity and a real focus on intersectionality. And some of the data points that came out of the recent study were that women are definitely making progress, which is good news. In the city of Toronto, where for every white woman, there's a racialized woman, white women outnumber racialized women 12-1 on corporate boards, where it should be a 1-to-1 ratio. And that's the kind of thing that we really highlight. We reanalyzed our data this year to pull out specifically people who were Black and on boards. We looked at over 1,600 corporate directors across Canada. We were able to identify 13 who were Black. And so it just underscores the points that have been made previously. And the other thing that I think is really critically important is to emphasize the importance of intentionality, because as many have mentioned around the table, often you'll hear from corporations, oh, we'd like to add more women, more Black people, more people of color, but there are none, or they're not qualified, or they don't apply. And when you see the data, and when you see that a number of corporate boards, for example, have more than 20% board members who are racialized, okay, which is almost comparable to the population. When you see that a portion of boards have more than 40% women, which is comparable to the population, and then you see some corporations with none, we call those the corporate zeros, that data, for me, is one of the best indicators that it is not the pool, it is the intentionality, it is the policies, and it is the processes. And that's why we think the data and the research is so important, and not just the quantitative data, but also the data on lived experience. For me, there were two things that came out in the last year in our research. One was a Muslim man who was part of the financial services industry, who would go out drinking with his comrades on Friday night on Bay Street, and he told them he was a recovering alcoholic rather than reveal that he was Muslim. And so I think when we talk about issues related to diversity and inclusion, we have to think about some of those invisible forms of diversity, because you see, for example, with a lot of Indigenous people who can pass, that they do not identify as Indigenous because they see it as not an asset, but a barrier. So those are some of the things the research tells us. I think in terms of what we need to do to make change, I don't want to repeat a lot of what's already been said, but the research really just reinforces things that have been said. There aren't easy solutions to complex problems, and certainly, I've been doing this work for a really long time. I think one of the most encouraging things is that we're actually naming racism. I remember when Donovan Bailey said that Canada was racist and everybody was horrified. I know from the Black Experience Project that while Canada has this notion that we're better than the US, half of the respondents said we weren't. And I think Bailey recently said Canada is racist. It's just more polite. So we have to own that. And I do think that recent events have allowed us to name the problem in a more specific way. We have to look at some of the societal issues. Those have been addressed. Representation in the media is a huge issue for us, not just in the entertainment media, but the news media. You'll see lots of Black people, for example, in the sports section, almost none in the business section. That sends out really strong messages. When we look at legislation, I'm not sure if people are aware, but Bill C-25, which was introduced last year, I guess, originally was comply or explain legislation, very similar to what you have at the provincial level that focused just on women. And with the help of BPPA and other groups, we were able to push to get the designated groups that are in Canadian legislation baked into that, so that now corporations, about half of them that are federally incorporated, must report on representation on their boards and in their senior leadership. And as a minimum, it's Indigenous people, people with disabilities, women, and racialized people. I think there's growing pressure to also add disaggregated data around Black people and LGBTQ, for example. But that's a big step forward in terms of the things people have talked about with respect to accountability. So we have to look at some of those broad things that provide a context for organizations. We have to look at organization practices. I've already talked about a lot of them: setting targets, measuring, being accountable, making sure that we're thinking about diversity and inclusion, not just as a numbers game in the human resources department, but we're looking at it all the way through the value chain. So we're looking at it in terms of product development. You know, artificial intelligence informed products, for example, are really potentially risky if we don't grapple with some of the potential to embed the worst characteristics of the developers. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done within organizations. And I would just say you see a lot that are paying lip service. I would argue one of the most important things they need to do is put their money where their mouth is. And so procurement, for example, when I talk to big corporations about what they need to do, one of the main things I look at is where are they spending their money? And they need to be spending their money supporting BIPOC entrepreneurs, women, and so on. And then finally, it's really at an individual level. And I love the comments that were made about the importance of getting engaged in politics. I've been to big meetings where, you know, people will say, Amnesty International, someone was at the protest in Seattle and the protest in Quebec City, and when you ask them the name of their member of parliament, they look at their shoes. If you disengage from political processes, even if you distrust them, you're going to get stuck with government and governance and structures that will not represent your interests. So I would just underscore the importance of continued activism and political engagement. And then the choices we make. The choices we make as consumers. You know, there's been a lot of publicity around the problem of waiting while Black and the way in which particularly Black people are often treated by retailers. I think we need to publicize that. I think we need consumers to put their money where their mouth is as well and not do business with companies that have racist practices. And we have to not stand by. I mean, what I would say, one of the worst things, whether we're talking about sexism, racism, any of the isms, is bystanders. And many of us work in organizations where we witness racist actions, anti-Black racist actions, Islamophobic actions, sexist actions. And unfortunately, those things continue because people don't speak out. So I do think that's the final thing that I would emphasize is organizations are just people, and you need everyone in the organization committed to the program.
Thank you so much, Wendy, for that. I like that the last few words you said. We need everyone really to be part of that conversation, because organizations are people coming together. It's not structures in the sense of a physical building, and we need to recognize that. And thank you so much when you talk about inclusion from a supplier side perspective. And of course, engagement of everyone is key, because at this time we don't need any bystanders. We need engaged people also in the political process. Thank you so much to you and your team, and we look forward to join you at the Fireside Chat during our Facebook Live segment. I want to just welcome Chris Noakes. Hey, Chris, how are you? Indigenous community advocate. My question for you, how can we make businesses more robust and more inclusive for not only Indigenous people, but people of color, Black people?
Well, Miigwech for having me, Hugh, and Miigwech for Lori, Nadine, and Wendy for all your perspectives on this, on this topic. I think we've talked a lot today about representation, and it is so important. I mean, a lot of the topics we talked about today, we could have whole conferences on those simple discussions because there's so much to talk about. But representation is truly key. The expertise and the knowledge that come from our community members is so important, and to make sure that we resource, those people can only make your businesses or organizations more robust and inclusive. So, to start there, that also, for a business and organization, and even as individuals, it requires a constant introspective reflection, on how we are either, operating our organization, what we are doing within the community, and going out into the community. I mean, get to know your community, whether it's the community you serve, whether it's the community internally, your employees, your support, your partners within the communities. Get to know them, that genuine relationships that need to be developed so that you can understand the community that you're serving or representing, so that you can understand those challenges and also help dismantle those challenges at the same time. So it's really important to have that community connection. It is so key with making sure that your businesses are inclusive. There are many points within mentorship that we can do, policy changes, looking at your total internal policies through a diversity lens to make sure they're equitable and inclusive to everyone. We want to make businesses and organizations that people want to be involved with. We want to make sure that there's safe work environments that values the perspective of community. And all policy should always be pushed by community. That focus and that lens should always be developed by community. So I think, those are really important things, to look at and to see where your organization and business stands in those respects, to your understanding of the community. I also think that, a lot of my experience is mainly in nonprofits. And when we look at, funding is always the major obstacle, but contract work is so common. So finding and offering opportunities for sustainable and full-time employment is huge within the community, because if we constantly are working on contract opportunities, we don't have the benefits to support our families, and it constantly puts us in an unstable, living environment. So it's having those sustainable opportunities with the benefits, and that will create healthy outcomes for the community. So mentorship, I'll go back to the mentorship part. Finding the youth and engaging the youth, again, part of that community, and business should always have that social responsibility to invest in our future, invest in the future community. As far as the Indigenous community goes in this country, we are the largest growing demographic in this country. So we have a workforce growing up now, that will have that expertise, and we need to grow that interest, grow that mentorship and support, and create those opportunities for the new generation.
Thank you so much, Chris. The perspective on mentorship really becomes important in our community across the BIPOC lens. And I appreciate that, because the issue of inclusivity and really moving the dial is about us being strengthened and guided. And I really want to, thank you and the work you have been doing both in and outside of the Indigenous community. Thanks to Nadine, Spencer, and BBP, and the amazing work, Lori and Wendy. It's a smorgasbord of comments I see coming in on the chat, and we need a whole week just to go through them. But very insightful perspectives coming, and people are appreciative. The participants are really appreciative, and that, I'm sure, when we turn over to our moderator, Stacey and Berry, who is on hold there. Stacey, get ready. Let me welcome you on board. Stacey will be taking some of those questions out, and thanks to our participants there on the panel who will be answering some of your questions in the chat. Over to you, Stacey. And
good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to the amazing panel. Very insightful. I was actually taking notes, learning a lot. Great to see you, Nadine and Chris and Wendy and Lori Ann. So I've been sifting through the chat. There's a lot of great engaging comments and feedback. There was a question that I think was for Wendy. Let me just see if I can find it here. From Nina. It was an interesting question. She was asking, what can I do as a white woman to more clearly understand the perspectives and needs of racialized women so I can support their rise? And so especially when you mentioned the high representation of white women on boards, maybe perhaps Wendy, you can comment on this.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of bizarre in some ways for a white woman to ask a white woman what to do. I think a big piece of it is listening. I mean, I learned a lot. You know, people like Paulette Senior educated me pretty early on when we were on boards together, and she was the person who insisted that we think when we were recruiting, for example, for Women's College Hospital, not about racialized people as a group, but we actually disaggregate and target Black women specifically. So, you know, I credit a lot of what I know, and I still don't know a lot, to, you know, listening to people around me. I really think, you know, and I'm on a lot of boards now. I'm part of organizations that give out awards and so on. I don't nominate white people for anything. So I've, you know, for the last number of years, I've just, because I'm embarrassed by some of the organizations that I'm involved in, I've just made it a personal mission to only promote racialized, Indigenous, and specifically Black women, whether it's, you know, when someone says, do you know someone for a board, or someone says, oh, we have this Entrepreneur of the Year award, or whatever it is. So that's a little thing, but I think that's helpful. I think making sure that when you are on a board and you invite diverse people in, that you work to create an inclusive environment, that you help coach them and make them successful. The whole idea of the unspoken rules, I think, is critically important, and you have to have trusting and open relationships with people in order to provide the kind of feedback that will help them be successful. Because, you know, in my mind, we have to create more inclusive environments. We have to fight the barriers. We have to fight bias and so on. But we also have to equip people to overcome the barriers while we wait for the world to be a better place. And so I think you need to think about those things, and also think that not being a bystander is really key. I mean, I've been on boards where there were racialized people who would use me as their spokesperson effectively, because they didn't want to have to always be advocating on their own behalf. And I think it's incredibly powerful when white women advocate for racialized women, racialized men advocate for LGBTQ2+ people, and Indigenous people advocate for women. And I do think that notion of allyship is really important. So the burden of fighting for equity is not on the shoulders of the people who are suffering from you know, anti-Black racism or discrimination. And I know certainly as a woman who's been doing this stuff for 30 years, I hate being the gender police. I would much rather be advocating on behalf of a group that I am not part of, because it gets exhausting to be the only woman at the table constantly saying, and what about the women, and what about the women, and what are we doing for the women?
Thank you for sharing those insights. And just to add, can you elaborate a little bit on how EDI initiatives can disrupt the status quo and the checkbox? Like, how can we go beyond the checkbox collectively?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question, because certainly we see a lot of organizations tripping over themselves right now to have the rainbow posters and the statements and the, you Black Lives Matter slogans. And I think all of that is good because it sends signals about how important this is. But I really think at the end of the day, it's the accountability issues. It's what have you actually done? It's shining a light on the actual results, where people are spending their money. I mean, whether we're talking the entertainment industry, whether we're talking about government granting programs, whether we're talking about financial institutions, procurement, and their financing. Like, it's great to set up a little, $1 million, $100,000 program supporting Black entrepreneurs, and no question, those programs are important. But I think where the real change will come is when we apply an anti-Black racism lens, a diversity and inclusion lens to everything that these organizations are doing to really level the playing field.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. I have some questions here for you, Nadine. What type of collaboration opportunities is a BBPA considering that could benefit Black entrepreneurs? So there's some partnerships that you're exploring. I know there's a lot of great things happening in the community, so perhaps you could speak to that.
It's not just that we're considering, we're putting everything into action. Our motto is no one gets left behind. And, we're really lining up with major businesses that we can participate with and introduce our membership to. We have a series called A Day in the Life of, and we started off with the Ogilvy, A Day in the Life of Ogilvy, and we'll be having upcoming in September, A Day in the Life of Loblaw, where we're showing our members the opportunities that's available. There are procurement opportunities, and these companies, they exist, they want a relationship, and how do we bridge that relationship into something very, very tangible where there's positive outcomes. And a part of that is the mentorship as well. We are sending our leaders into these organizations to talk about what it is to be a Black entrepreneur, a Black business person, a Black professional. And then these organizations are also coming to the BBPA to share their experiences and to talk about the opportunities in their organizations for our members. So that's a part of the collaborations that we're forging. And also with CAMC, Canadian Aboriginal Minority Council, that's another partnership that we have. And our members gets to have, if you're a first year applying for a CAMC membership, which puts you at the seat to procurement opportunities as a member of this Diversity Council initiative. BBPA members gets 30% off for the first year. So which again, it's access. What we find is that Black businesses, we need opportunities, we need access to be at the table. And when we set these opportunities up, for our members, we're really insisting and pushing it together and forging it, in different sectors like banking. We also have around the board table, then you get access, and then what? I talked earlier about the nuances of when you get a seat at the table, what do you do? How do you navigate that system? So we're not always asking the Wendy Suke's of the world to advocate for us. And many of the times we do have to do that. It's interesting, my daughter had a comment. She said, Mom, one Black voice is 1,000 amplifies, one white voice amplifies like 1,000 Black voices. We need to change that, though. We need where one Black voice will have that resonance of 1,000 voices, period. Right? And so we prepare our members for that level of discourse, that dialogue, that when we get to the table, we're ready, game on, to advocate and to play the game, and same thing for government. We also have great partnerships with government, and then preparing our members to have a seat at the table and for advocating for themselves and to have.
And that's really important. You're doing awesome work. Thank you for sharing that. I will move over to Lori Ann, just a couple questions. So you spoke a bit about how, I guess it is heartbreaking when the call to the bar, you're not seeing that diverse face of Black people being called to the bar in those numbers. Can you speak a little bit about what areas of the legal profession lack representation from the Black community? So
I think that certainly there's definitely areas that lack Black people in law. We certainly see more in those who are sole practitioners, but we don't see, for example, those in corporate areas of law. We see some in government, but not really, as I said, in the leadership. We do not see in any way representation in the judiciary, despite kind of appointments that are lauded as being diverse, but what we do know, especially I'm a criminal lawyer, so I can say what you see is an overrepresentation of Indigenous and Black people on the other side, and yet those people who come before the court do not see themselves reflected in the judiciary. So, or unfortunately, even in the Crown's office. And once you kind of diversify these areas, it will affect the communities on a whole, because they understand the experiences and lived experiences of those who come before them. Other areas of law, and which is why I've actually reached out to Tanya Lee Williams, which is we do have a lot of people who are interested in entertainment law, but again, a lack of understanding of how to get into that area of law. Lack of mentorship, it's very niche, and so we don't have people going into that area. Certainly when you talk about IP and things like that, it becomes, you see again, more of a lack of representation. And it's why we so strongly, and I know at Cable, we work with the Black Law Students Association of Canada, which has a chapter in each school. They reach out to those who, or at least have not applied or are interested in applying. So Cable, along with the Black Female Lawyers Network and BALSA Canada, really try to work together to try to get to provide that support. And so we really need the numbers. We also need the data. And so when you talk about governments who note we've appointed diverse groups and our diversity is increased by so much, what's not done is it's not desegregated down to how many Black judges have been appointed, how many Indigenous judges have been appointed. We really need to see those numbers, and that's when we can really test to see where the breakdowns happens. And if we can work with our Black, Indigenous people of color partners to really kind of incorporate, because it's not a cup that comes to an edge and therefore all these other people now lose their spot. If we work together, we're actually better for it. And that's the thing that needs to really be dealt with, is understanding that we are better when we are all working together, and the legal system, which affects every area of Canadian society, is better when it's a more diverse society.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. That was really helpful. There's a question that came in from Sion. He wanted to ask, what suggestions and recommendations do any of the panelists, so this could be for anyone, have on migrants who are struggling to get into the corporate workspace? We know that's a big issue in Canada, despite many having years of experience outside Canada. How do you navigate not having Canadian experience or education? So who would like to comment on this? Any of the panelists?
I mean, I can say,
Lori?
Yeah, I can say for law, I mean, one of our bigger challenges are those who are internationally trained. Even in Canada, those who are trained in Canada, they have significant issues, but those who are internationally trained have real problems. And so again, this is where associations are very helpful in connecting those who are internationally trained to those who are in Canada to, again, develop those mentorships, and when I say mentorship, I don't mean once in a blue moon having a conversation. I mean active mentorships where you really have a deep understanding of what needs to be done, where you can improve, how to kind of fit in, what kind of those subtle and subconscious issues are that you have to deal with on a day-to-day basis that you just can't get by learning in books. You really need to kind of be immersed in the system. Thank you. This is where you have BPA, the Cable, the other associations. You really need to join those associations to get that connection to a community that will help you be part of that community without feeling like another or an outsider.
Yeah, and I just want to add great points, Lorianne, and I want to add to that, participating and showing up. even when, and I say collectively, we are uncomfortable, because the only way we're going to get comfortable is by participating in the space, in all kinds of spaces. And, you know, the BBPA, again, we have various programs that is catered to newcomers. And again, it's all about the experience and the integration and talking to other individuals, and until you're comfortable. So.
Thank you for that, Nadine. Anybody else on the panel wanted to comment on this question? Okay, so we'll move along. I have a question for you, Chris Noakes. And it speaks a lot to what you highlighted with the importance of relationship, building relationships with community, getting to know the community, all of us collectively building better relationships with each other is key. What type of policy changes would create a meaningful impact for Indigenous communities? I know this is...
saw that question, you know, right away sort of you go to, well, the Indian Act, and you talk about those federal you know, legislations and policies that can change, that have been oppressive and discriminatory, you know, legislation from the day they were made and continue to this day, and talk about our rights to self-govern and all of that. But that's a long shopping list.
It is, I know.
Just to sort of bring it a little bit more local, we talk about the kind of policies that we can, you know, change inside our organizations. And part of that, I'm working on policy change right now. And the importance of that policy change is, again, you know, the policies should always be community driven. Absolutely. And those policies, when you put them in place, you know, especially, you know, some of the ones that I'm working on now are long-awaited policy changes. We've been, you know, community employees have been asking for these changes for decades, you know, and so I'm thankful in this time now that we're able to push things forward. But when you change those types of policies, especially, you know, internally, you're creating safe spaces. You're creating a space where the perspective of diverse, you know, members, you know, feel that they are valued. And it also sends a message out, you know, from leadership to the members of the organization, and that these initiatives are important. And that is so important for creating a safe and well and, you know, a positive and a wellness of your employees. Like, that environment and that message has to be clear, you know, going out from leadership, that these policies are being put in place because it's important that, you know, to us, it's important to the organization, it's important to the community, and this is what we're doing. And stay steadfast in that message, because it's so important for it to continually going out, so that the culture, when they're negative inside organizations, or that culture that organization has towards community, it's so important in moving that critical change, so that we can, you know, make things better. And it's policy driven. I mean, definitely in the government, there are ways to make things, you know, better for the Indigenous community and for all of our diverse community. But that message needs to go out, you know, loud and clear, and we can't stop trying to push, you know, those changes that are so critical. And a big part of that, again,
Thank you so much for the very insightful facilitation, Stacey, and great feedback from our panel. Thank you so much, Nadine. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Chris and Lorianne.
We have our next session, which is a few things going on. Again, thank you to the panelists on the last session on business and community. That was wonderful. Sorry about the occasional interruptions, but that's part of the process, and we deal with it. We have some good security at the back. Cuts them off right away. So we're going to jump to a couple things. First, the community forums, which are great. There's the different ones on humanity and other things. People would have pre-registered for those forums at the point of registration. So very shortly, we're going to have you break out into your breakout rooms, and which is quite interesting, and that's going to be fun. Also, Myself and Hugh will be joining Wendy Suke on the Facebook Live 25-minute session done at the same time. So we'll be there. And on that note, it's breakout room time. And we'll be back. Okay? See you shortly. Stick around. Thank you.
So Wendy, okay, so great. We have Wendy on.
Hi, Hal.
How you doing?
So running a little bit. This is Hal Johnson, by the way.
Okay.
Body break. Okay, we're running a little behind. I apologize, but it's an exciting thing. We are running behind.
No
That was
problem.
wonderful. Yeah.
So it's great to have Wendy on this fireside chat on Facebook Live. Bruce, thank you, Wendy, for agreeing to share with us on this Facebook Live fireside chat. And, you know, it's brought to you by Real Talk Candles, candles that really start real conversation. And I'm excited, Wendy, and you know, commendations to you and your team on this exciting report, and you know, the interesting highlights you're gonna share from the diversity leads, diverse representation in leadership, a review of 8 Canadian cities. That's groundbreaking. Just came in 2020, so we look forward to hearing and sharing some highlights. So over to you, Wendy.
That's great. And can you hear me and can you see my screen?
I can hear you and see your screen. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. And I'll try to be brief because everyone on the call can read the report if they're interested. But I did think that some of this is perhaps relevant to what people are talking about, if only because it validates the lived experience. I mean, what it does is show, I think very clearly, as I said earlier, that racism, sexism, homophobia, all of those things are not figments of people's imaginations. Systemic racism is very much reflected in the structures of just about every sector. And while we see that progress is being made, especially for women, it's mostly for white women. And we need, you know, if all we do is replace the white men with white women, we're not making progress. And frankly, if all we do is replace the white men with black men, we're also not making progress. So having that intersectional lens, in my view, is critically important. So a lot of this has already been talked about, and I really will try to keep my remarks brief into 15 minutes. So the business case, people have already talked about it. It isn't to say that we aren't concerned about social justice and fairness and equity, but it is to say that there's pretty good evidence that organizations that do a better job in having diverse and inclusive environments, diversity being the, you know, representation, different people around the table, inclusion being making those people feel welcome and valued. It does connect to a number of important corporate objectives, like ensuring there's an appropriate talent pool. If you're ignoring half the population, you're picking from, you know, as someone said, it's like trying to win a baseball game with one arm tied behind your back. We also know that markets are becoming increasingly diverse. And so if you are not doing a good job of this, it can really bite you because, you know, there's really good evidence on things like, you know, 17% of people in Ontario have a disability, but 55% of people in Ontario have a member of their family with a disability. So trust me, if somebody mistreats someone with autism, it affects how I look at that company, even though it's not me that has the disability. And I do think that we see evidence of that increasingly in the current environment, where companies that are seen as being racist are going to lose not just their racialized customers, but lots of other people who think values are important. There are also issues related to employee engagement. If you don't see yourself at the top, if you don't see yourself represented, if you don't feel valued, you're not likely to perform as well. And then there's the reputational risks. I mean, we've seen organizations in the public and private sector get really hammered because they mess this up. Even, for example, the RCMP commissioner saying that she didn't believe systemic racism existed in the RCMP had to backtrack a few days later. So I do think that that's a strong indication of why this is tied very much to organizational success, regardless of the sector that you're in. And I'm a researcher, so I actually think the numbers matter, but they're not the only thing that matters. I do think that we need to track, we need to benchmark. As has been said, we need to disaggregate the data. Right at the beginning of the COVID crisis, for instance, I was one of the people saying we need disaggregated data because this is affecting some people way more than others. It's affecting women way more than it's affecting men. It's affecting racialized people more than it's affecting white Caucasians, and it's certainly affecting Black people even more. And a lot of that has to do with the intersections of things like socioeconomic status, which comes out very clearly when you look at the maps, and other dimensions of identity. So I do believe that measurement research is an important place to start. I did say a little bit in the earlier session that I don't want to seem unduly optimistic or naive, but I do think that LC 25 is an important step forward. I do feel that we won an important victory when we were able, and this was the Diversity Institute with about 30 other organizations, including many who are around the table, we were able to argue that focusing just on women was insufficient. And if you look at our data, it shows that the work that has been done advocating for women on boards has paid off. There has been a significant increase in women on boards. Not enough. We're not exactly where we should be. There's still lots of corporate zeros that we need to take on. But the fact is, the years of advocacy have paid off. And yet, when we look at a city like Toronto, where the representation of women is edging up close to 40%, the representation of racialized people is still in the teens. And that's in a city where half the population is female, half the population is racialized. So making sure that we now have regulatory requirements that corporations report not just on gender, but also on racialization, people with disabilities, Indigenous people, I think is an important step forward. And I would support the argument that we need to also disaggregate racialized people as a category. However, having at least the 4 categories that are in the employment equity legislation is a big step forward. So in terms of our study, we looked at almost 10,000 board members in the largest organizations across 5 sectors in 8 cities. And it's worth mentioning, we'd done a similar study on the media. We'd done a similar study on breaking out the legal sector and the judiciary. And again, the numbers were useful in moving things forward, though not as fast as we would like. We also, as I said, we reanalyzed the data to specifically look at Black representation. And this was partly informed by our previous work with the Black Experience Project and other studies where we have shown very clearly, for example, if you look at immigrants, that the experience of Black immigrants is fundamentally different than the experience of Chinese immigrants, even though all racialized immigrants are treated worse than white immigrants. So that category of racialized, it does provide a bucket that differentiates from sort of the privileged establishment. But just as we see with Indigenous populations, that the category of Indigenous masks important differences between the Inuit, First Nations, and Métis, the category of visible people masks differences. In the same way, the category of disability masks differences between people who have mild invisible disabilities and those who have very obvious disabilities, if that makes sense. So I don't think we should throw out those buckets, but I think we need to recognize the limitations of the buckets, because if you're an immigrant and you're racialized and you're Muslim and you're an observant Muslim who wears a hijab, you're facing a whole different set of obstacles than other racialized immigrants.
Wendy, just a quick question. Are you sharing a presentation? I'm just seeing your screen file on this,
Oh, I am screen sharing.
Yes, yeah, and I'm just seeing your file screen from your desktop. I'm not seeing
You're not seeing the PowerPoint?
No, I'm not, yeah, so.
I suspect it might be on your end, but.
Okay, I'll just go with it, yeah. You're seeing it, Bruce? Oh, good.
I'm seeing it now. What happened?
Yeah. Yeah, so we're there. Thanks, Wendy. We're there. Good.
Okay. So this shows this shows what we did, and as I said, I'm not going to go through it in great detail, but let's look at Toronto, because that's where most of us are right now. So in Toronto, half the population is women. Women are now 38%. Almost 39% representation on boards. Big differences between corporate boards and nonprofit boards. Nevertheless, you can see that's moving up. Racialized people are exactly the same proportion of the population, and look at the overall level of representation, 15.5%. And on corporate boards, it's far lower. And then look at the Black population. And again, you'll see that while Black people are 7.5% of the population in Toronto, they're only 3.6% of boards generally and less than 1% of corporate boards. And as I mentioned earlier, across Canada, we looked at 1,600 corporate board members, and we were able to find 13 who were Black. And that's in spite of the fact that we're seeing more and more Black lawyers, Black professionals, even Black CEOs, but they're not making that transition to corporate boards. We see lots of, or relatively more Black people represented on university boards, hospital boards, and so on. And one of our ongoing arguments is that skills developed in the nonprofit sector should be valued in the corporate sector. Skills developed in the corporate sector are clearly valued in the nonprofit sector. And I would actually argue that running a hospital or running a university, way more complicated than running a mid-sized private sector corporation. But when we look at corporate boards and the criteria that they're looking for, it's usually executive experience in a corporation rather than valuing the experience of nonprofits. We also, because we couldn't count in the same way because they're almost a rounding error, we looked at people with disabilities, Indigenous people, and LGBTQ2+ people. And what we found in those interviews, as I mentioned earlier, was a lot of people who simply obscured their identity because they were so concerned about discrimination. If you're Black, unless you're very light-skinned, it's often hard to be seen as anybody other than someone who is Black. If you're a woman, in most cases, it's hard to be seen as anything other than a woman. But if you're Indigenous, if you're gay, and if you have certain invisible disabilities, you can conceal those dimensions of your identity. And that creates a whole different kind of pathology that we saw. So as I said, this is the reality, which is pretty grim, getting better for women, but nowhere near where we should be with racialized people or Black people. And as I mentioned as well, I think we need to think more about how we can promote lateral movement between, for example, hospital boards, volunteer boards, university and college boards, and the corporate sector. And I got his permission to give him as an example, but think about Gervin Fearon, who some people may know. Gervin is now the president at Brock, was the president at Brandon. He ran a cost recovery center, very large successful center at Ryerson. Gervin is an accountant. Gervin has a PhD in economics. Gervin is a graduate of the Institute for Corporate Directors. Gervin has served on multiple boards and chaired many of them. Gervin has never been invited to a corporate board.
Wow. Wow.
We see differences among cities.
Oh.
I think I've explained this a lot. And I think that for me, one of the biggest issues, I'm just going to skip ahead, is the point I made earlier, which is in Toronto, where for every white woman, there's a racialized women, white women outnumber racialized women 12 to 1. What that means is white women have power and white women need to open more doors, because it makes no sense in the population 1 to 1 and on corporate boards 12 to 1. And the other point that I think is super important, you can see that 18.9% of corporate boards in Toronto now have at least 40% women, okay? And a few still have none. There is no way those boards that don't have women can say there are no qualified women when you start to see other boards hitting 40%.
Mm-hmm.
Is true with racialized people. When you see that 13% of corporate boards in Vancouver have 20% racialized people, please don't tell me there are none, because some organizations are just working harder to find them. And I think just in terms of the qualitative research, for me, one of the really heartbreaking quotes was this one by Colin Durham, who's from Pride at Work, who said, the queer mentors I had early in my career shared the same wisdom. Hide who you are until you get promoted so high, they can't get rid of you without people noticing. And again, that applies to Muslim people, that applies to lots of the Indigenous people that we spoke to. And it's something we need to really address. And as I said as well earlier, from my point of view, we need to grapple with these issues at the societal level, the organizational level, and at the individual level, because the choices we make as individuals have a profound impact on what the opportunities are for others. So I'll stop there, and we can go back if there are questions.
Actually, that is.
Well, thank you, Wendy. Bruce, over to you. Thank you, Wendy.
But I saw numbers, but the trends. Are we actually making progress? Some cases, or it's slow progress, like the statistics. Like in the last, it sounds like there's been a lot of progress on the white women thing.
Yeah, I've been doing this.
The rest of the progress lagged behind.
I've been doing this research for 10 years, and we've definitely seen progress with women. We've seen some progress with racialized people, like in 2017, white women outnumbered racialized people 17 to 1. Now it's only 12 to 1. So there are indications we're making baby steps. But overall, racialized people on boards in this set of data was lower than in previous years. So in a lot of areas, we're sliding backwards. For example, provincial agencies, boards, and commissions have gone backwards, while municipal boards seem to be moving forward because many cities like Toronto are really making commitments in this area.
Is there a lack of awareness on the data amongst the population? This data you put out, is that part of it? Like, how does the bar get moved? Is this a starting point? Because like when I read the report, and I have to admit, I was not aware of that data. I mean, I had some idea, but I had no idea about the real data. Is that how we start by moving the bar? Is there a lack of communication? Is the data needed?
Yeah, I think that the data is helpful because it just says this is not a figment of anybody's imagination. This is real. Here's the evidence.
Exactly.
And don't tell me there are none, because there are lots. You're just not looking in the right places. And I'm completely prepared to make those arguments. And similarly, like well-intentioned corporations with rainbow posters and targeted funds, yay, great. But where are most of your loans going? Who is benefiting from the programs that you're offering? And I don't care whether you're a bank or you're Starbucks. Those are the questions that we have to ask. And And those questions are a lot more difficult in some respects, saying how many of these and how many of those do you have? Really digging in to those corporate policies which have a profound impact is critically important.
Or some
qualifications you're looking for on your board. If you say you have to have been a CEO of a company in order to be on our board, and if there are more CEOs named Bob than there are CEOs who are women, clearly you're not going to find it. But if you start to think about what the qualifications are and what insights and skills people need to bring to the board and start to open up your minds to what's possible, that's when you create opportunities.
So, and what is a board? Maybe the board needs the diversity. What's the one to use? Like maybe the whole concept of who sits on a board is going to change.
Well, I would argue
like
that
the old traditional,
if you've got people who went to the same private school in golf together every weekend, you get groupthink, you don't get diversity, and you certainly are not plugged in to the needs of your customers, clients, or citizens.
Maybe also what's needed is some big champion. I mean, companies. Some of these big companies need the champion. There needs to be champions. Like if you go on, like I went on, as I learned through this last 6 weeks with Hugh, and personally, real outward for me, I went out to some people in certain companies, and I looked at the boards, and it's not diverse. But just by going on the internet and checking that it's not diverse, so there needs to be some champions that really step up and publicly step up and start doing some stuff. Anyway, my thoughts.
Wendy, in terms of moving the dial as it relates to getting more diverse voices on board, and McKinsey says boards become 30% more, or organizations become 30% more profitable when they have diverse boards. What are some of the things that BIPOC people need to have access to? Like, for example, you speak of Gervin with the ICD accreditation, Institute of Corporate Directors. Is that one thing that we're missing?
So it's interesting because I have mixed feelings about the ICD. Apologies to anybody on the line, because they get $20,000 a year, and so the people who normally are going to be supported by their corporations are people who are already in the club. So I think we need alternatives to those expensive programs, or we need, corporations to sponsor people so they can get the qualifications. Like there are lots of things that need to be done, but in my mind, it's not that complex. You need targets, you need accountability, you need transparency. And if companies are really held to account by government, by their customers, whether they're corporate customers or individual consumers, that drives action faster than anything. I really do think you need to follow the money a little bit. Like the publicity and the attention in the media, all of those things, incredibly powerful. But as you know, we often see issues that are very front of mind for people for a period of time, and then their attention shifts. And I think we need those accountability frameworks so people can't forget the promises that they made, that we're going to look at their numbers, we're going to look at their policies, and we're going to vote with our money.
Actually, that's a good perspective, Wendy, because I have been in higher education here, and I know the Association of University and College Teachers did a study that reported back in 2018 that between 2006 and 2016, the dial did not move on BIPOC representation in higher education in terms of tenure track professor. I have been in higher education, passed over 3 times for tenure track roles. I won't name the institutions. People see where I've been affiliated with. And the question is how, if we see this happening when the students we see in our classrooms are so diverse, why is the faculty not representative of the diversity we see in our classrooms?
So, I mean, one of the things that, and I will not defend universities on this because I've sat on way too many committees that I have not agreed to. One of the problems with the university sector right now is it is sort of last in, first out. And
Mhm.
we have tenure, because there is no mandatory retirement. Like, I'm staying there till I'm dead, sorry.
Okay.
We're not creating enough space for younger, diverse people. It's a similar issue on boards. So that's one issue. The other issue is typically in the universities, the power structure is dominated by people who've been there for a long time and have seniority and are full professors and have tenure. And guess what? Most of those people look like me. And you end up in these situations where the decision-making bodies are always going to prefer people who are just like them, you know, in the same way the boards prefer people who went to the same private school and the same golf clubs. And we have to break those patterns. The data are helpful, but insufficient. And what's ironic to me is that corporations are now subject to more accountability with Bill C-25 than hospitals or universities. There is no requirement, as far as I know, anywhere in the country for universities to report on their diversity and inclusion data. Some do it, a lot don't, and there's no accountability frameworks built in for universities. So if you get senior people who are sort of think diversity is important, you may get more intentionality. But most universities are like little fiefdoms, and they can kind of do what they want with impunity. So we really have to challenge some of those assumptions. Some of the things that I have heard said when I was the associate dean, when I was the vice president, and now that I'm back as a faculty member, are horrifying. And I'm sufficiently secure that I can call people out on stuff, but it doesn't necessarily translate into better behavior.
Thank you for that perspective, because, you know, when we think of higher education institutions in this country, they're publicly funded, you know, and the fact that their taxpayers' dollar being spent, representation across the boards become important, and the hollowed halls of academia must be and ought to be reflective of what's happening in our society as a whole, I think.
Well, it's more than that. I mean, we know from the Black Experience Project, for example, that more than half of young people do not feel included at school. And you amplify that in the university environment if people are being taught. I looked you up on rateyourprofessor.com, and your students are pretty fond of you.
Thank you.
But it is so important because if you don't see it, you can't be it. And so I'm very passionate about this particular issue. I would also say, however, based on my experience, especially dealing with not just racialized people, but often internationally educated professionals who come into the university system, there are a lot of unspoken rules. The culture is highly peculiar. And if I have time, I give you one example. I went up for full professor. I am not shy. I went in with, you know, binders. Here's all the stuff I did. Here's every paper I wrote. Here's every note a student wrote me saying, you know, you're awesome, I love you, like whatever. Piles of stuff to make the case. A colleague who is actually much better scholar than me, much better, from mainland China, went in with a folder like this. And he got pushed back. I mean, and basically they said, go talk to Wendy, because she's relentless, self-promotional, knows how this works. And I said to him, like, why didn't you put in this? 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 And he said, I thought they knew me.
Oh.
And then the second thing was, of course, in Chinese culture, deference, modesty, brevity, those are values in a way that shameless self-promotion is not.
Exactly.
Very true.
If you don't know how to promote yourself and make sure that people are aware of what you're doing, you're going to be disadvantaged. And that would be one observation I would make, is that we all need more mentoring, sponsoring, and coaching young faculty members to help them navigate these barriers, because it's going to be a long time before the barriers come down.
Yeah.
But I do believe that people in positions of power can help pull people up.
Thank you so much for that. Everyone's coming back. So thank you, Wendy, so much for the insights on the amazing report that's done. And kudos to you and the team. Have to shout that out to the Diversity Institute for the work you and your team have been doing. And we are really excited and honored to have you here sharing the diversity leads, diversity representation in leadership, a review of 8 Canadian cities 2020. Very insightful. And we have to have a fireside chat outside of this event to really share more highlights. So if you're open to it, we're welcome to have you. Bruce, so over to you. So we welcome, yes. So welcome, Bruce, back.
We just finished the 7 breakout rooms. And next, thank you, everybody. Thank you to the leaders in the breakout rooms. Much appreciated. And next, Hugh is going to lead a session from the Wiltshire Group, the new Hugh on the Voices of Humanity. And then take it away, Hugh.
All right. Thank you, Bruce. That was exciting having that fireside chat with Wendy Suke from the Diversity Institute at Ted Rogers School of Management at Ryerson University. And thanks to all those who were in the community forums. Exciting. So I'm excited to share the second segment of Voices of Humanity with Lamont Wiltshire and Eccleston. The exciting thing about this is these are 2 young entrepreneurs who've been doing amazing work. And a lot of times we don't hear about the good work people are doing in our community. So I want to welcome Odine and Lamont. Hello, hello.
Hello, everyone.
It's great to have you, and thank you so much for the support. Thank you for making the time. And I'm just going to throw this over to you. So tell us, what are your key tips in really building an innovative blueprint? Odine and Lamont, over to you.
Yeah, thanks for having us, first of all. We feel greatly appreciated and humbled to be on this great panel, so thank you for that. A couple things is, first and foremost, we just say as simple as you gotta love what you do and have a passion for it. So anything you start in, whatever it is, make sure there's some love and passion, because we find those early days, it's a lot of hard work, long hours, unpaid, and you just got to go through it. And if you love it, the core root, or at least like it, it makes it a little bit easier. So I think just starting there.
Yeah, most certainly. And just having a keen understanding of the logistics, the mechanisms, and the inner workings of whatever field or industry that you are in. And also, we've done a lot of research, and we continue to do research on sort of the trajectory of where our industry is going, just to sort of stay on the cutting edge and on top of trends, because especially with technology, that can sort of push people out of the industry that they're in. So it's really important to continue to stay on top of things, because you know, industries are constantly changing and in flux. And of course, it's important to have strategy in whichever industry that you're in, and to stick to whatever plans that of course you're making. And number one actually is partnership. You're only sort of the sum total of your parts, right?
Well, I'm looking at you too, and you're amazing at this.
So the partnership was a big thing for us. So what has happened in our situation, we're in the real estate field. So we do home building, real estate development, and real estate buying and selling. Odine's background was real estate buying and selling. She's an agent now, a broker, and we have our own brokerage now. But when I started, I was in the construction field and in the building field. So we took 2 individuals who have made their headway and a little bit of success on their own, and we fused one partnership, and it helped out because Odine's strengths are my weaknesses, and I have a little bit more weaknesses than her. So my weaknesses are her strengths, which there are a lot of them. She covers her butt on a lot of stuff, but we've been able to make that work. And as a whole, we've been able to strengthen our company and kind of go through a growth stage over the last 7 or 8 years.
Oh, this is exciting to hear, because the other thing I know, and I'm laughing because you said your weakness is Odin's strength and vice versa. And I have to commend you too, because when you think, for example, when we made contact and you agree to, Odin, I remember you just come out of the cusp of, opening. And how did you navigate? How did you navigate just getting back, given this upheaval, this new normal? What are some, what's the key insight you could share for entrepreneurs in terms of the blueprint?
Yeah, so I'll tell you this, Hugh, since the onset of this pandemic and all of the changes, we collectively have had perhaps 2 days off. We have not had any time off because when you are steering the ship, right, when you're navigating the ship and you have a company and so many team members that are looking to you for strength, we have to ensure that we continue to be focused and to really stay as kind of positive and optimistic as possible. Because if you falter and start wavering, then people within your team will get nervous, right? So it's definitely one of the things is staying completely focused. Again, leaning on a partner. We cannot emphasize that enough, because I definitely wouldn't be able to do this alone.
And just playing on what Odin said, one major thing is just adjusting, being able to adjust on the fly. Like the pandemic, I don't think anybody was ready or prepared at all. Like there's nobody that can say they were, but I think some of the companies that have kind of made it through and not to even have grown through, but just at least have made it through the turbulence, I think are going to come out stronger, because those are the companies that can adapt to and be fluid and change as the climate of our world, our economy, go. So even though it's not an innovative tool to adapt to change, I think that's a major key to being able to continue and go as you go along.
I really appreciate the insight and my parting shot, and I have to commend you, Odin, because the other thing I had the opportunity to realize that you're one of, if not the only Black face I've seen on HGTV in Canada. And really, I say, how do we get more representation of young entrepreneurs who are doing great work being shared across platforms?
Well, the real estate industry, especially the building industry, for a long time looked very homogenous, and it looks very sort of older, and like you sort of think of like the older European faces when you think of building. But we took that and we decided, let's make that our strength. Instead of, right, so Hugh, instead of looking at it as a disadvantage, we said, okay, well, maybe we can look to this as an advantage, because we'll stand out. And so we heavily marketed ourselves as who we are, and people can kind of detect authenticity. So I think perhaps that is what took place when they reached out to us to be one of the faces on HGTV. They do, of course, have Sebastian Clovis, who is who's Black, but to be a woman and one of the first Black women on that network is certainly an honor that I didn't take lightly. Every scene shooting, I'm thinking of us and our community
representing right. We got to represent right.
Yeah. So it's about really and truly continuing to do our best, and that's just sort of a burden that we have as Black people, but it's a burden that Lamont and I most certainly embrace.
Well, thank you both so much. Lamont, thank you, Odin, for really bearing the burden that becomes a blessing for us to have you being part of this inaugural event, and really appreciate you being here on the Voices of Humanity. And thanks to you and the team at the Wilshire Group for all you've done. And we continue to wish you all the best and amazing success. Over to you, Bruce.
Thank you again, Lamont and Odine. That was wonderful. Anyways, we have another session of the Voice of Humanity. I'm very excited. I'm going to introduce Hal Johnson. Okay. And who remembers from 30 years ago the show Body Break on TV? Put up your hand. Anybody remember Body Break? Okay. Hal Johnson is the producer, the creator of the TV show, of the TV series Body Break. What they did, this going back many years, they signed on, they did about, I think, 65 episodes for participation. He did that. He's a producer, motivator. He was on The Amazing Race. They were close, didn't win, but they did well. So good afternoon, Hal.
Good afternoon.
Okay, so Hal's going to tell you a story, and basically just tell us your story. Like you started off like 25, 30 years ago, and now we're today, and you're doing all new things, and the journey continues, and you're amazing. Okay. So,
well, I'll tell a story that I did on our YouTube channel. It was something I did about 2 months ago, and I just thought, you know what? Let me, with all the things that turmoil and so forth, let me just tell people the story that we rarely talk about, is how Body Break got started. And since we've talked about that, I'm amazed at how many people have come to me and told me their story. And I find that's so interesting. And a lot of the stories, they didn't get through, they didn't succeed, and they were discouraged, and it was is disheartening. And what happened, as a Black person growing up, I felt, you constantly get knocked down, but you got to get up. And that's what I was taught from my dad, you got to get up. And so I had an opportunity, I met Joanne, and we had talked about, fitness and health, and we talked about doing those things. And at the same time, I was trying to be a sports broadcaster. And so I knocked on TSN's door. I had a tape, had an opportunity. They let me in, I showed it. They hired me. And then 3 hours later, they fired me because they didn't want 2 Black reporters on TSN. And so I went home that day after I was hired and fired, and it was quite, I was discouraged. But my dad has always told me that don't take the baggage of someone else. And he always has said, there's always a way. There's always a way. And that's what I've had hammered into me, that if you don't go through the front door, you go through the back door. Now, my dad played a traveling Negro baseball team throughout the South and throughout North America. And so that's the tradition he had. He was traveling the bus, and he couldn't even get off the bus because they wouldn't let Black people eat in the restaurants as they were traveling. So that's why he would eat sardines as a kid. I would see my dad eating sardines and crackers and ask him why. I said, well, that's the only thing we could eat on the bus. So that's where he came from. And he instilled me with this idea that there's always a way to get through things in life. And so when I was discouraged with that opportunity, I then went doing some acting and some things. And on June 8th of 1988, which was 2 months later, I was in a particular scene at a Woodbine racetrack, and there was a white woman and then a white gentleman on the other side, and they switched them after we'd rehearsed for about an hour. And I asked why, and they said, well, because the client didn't want you next to the white woman, and because they might think you guys are together. And he laughed, and it was the assistant director. And it was like a light bulb hit me. It's like, this is what we have to do. We have to make a change. We have to show that we can all live, work, and play together. We have to show that there's no difference between any of us. And we've got to break these barriers down. And we've got to show not only people of color, but we've got to show that women are as equal as men. And so with Joanne and I, we kind of came up with this idea of a Body Break. And it was very important to us, imperative to us, that we show persons with disabilities, to show people that no matter what your disability is, may be, we can all get out there and get active together. So in many of our Body Break episodes, there'll be a person with disability that you won't even see, you won't even notice. It's not wheelchair basketball per se. It's eating in a restaurant and somebody will go by in a wheelchair. So, and what we wanted to show is that that person who's in a wheelchair at home will see themselves. And just as well, we as, as Black people, we want to be able to see ourselves in a reflection of television. And so Joanne and I in July of 1988 made these 3 pilot episodes, and I took it around to 42 different stations and sponsors. And I was never discouraged, but I was turned down at every single one because I knew I had something and I knew that this would work until I hit TSN again, and TSN loved it. And they said, well, they would put it on air, but because I'm Black and Joanne's white, they didn't think the Canadian audience would be ready for it. And once again, I went home that afternoon and I thought about it. And one thing I do is when I look at a phone and if I have a problem, either I go out for a walk or I look at a phone and figure out who I have to call. And I kind of chant to myself, who can I call? What can I do? Who can I call? What can I do? Who can I call? What can I do? And I think about it. And then it was like I said to Joanne, who does the fitness stuff for the government? And she said, oh, participation. And 3:30 that afternoon, I called them. And we within about 3 weeks, we had a contract with Participation, and we eventually did 65 and then went off to do them on our own, and subsequently have spawned other businesses and opportunities and so forth over the past 32 years. And it was really something that my dad really instilled in me, that all those people that turned me down, all those people that rejected, don't take on their baggage. Because every time somebody says something about you negatively, you'll take their baggage on and you'll be loaded. And as you go down that road, you are struggling with their baggage that you're hauling down, and that weighs you down, and that psychologically weighs you down. And so that's what he always told us, don't do that. And so I figure that every day I'm going to get rejected at least once. And so it literally just flies off. But one thing, TSN, when they heard my story a couple months ago, they came back and I got a call from TSN, and they gave me an apology. They said, we'd like to apologize to you, and then put it out in the social media and so forth. And I told them at the time, I said, you don't have to apologize to me. There's no reason to apologize. And I didn't think anything of it. And now I realize that they shouldn't apologize to me, but they should apologize to all of the people who have told me since I put that video out, how they were rejected at TSN, how they didn't get an opportunity, and how they've now gone. I know one gentleman who was a assistant producer there was trying to get on air there for several years and would not even be allowed to put a demo tape together at TSN and he was an assistant producer where he saw the white people move ahead. Now, TSN said to me, the vice president told me, she said, TSN is going to now change their intern policy, that there'll be no kind of a friend of a friend will get an internship, because that's how you get in. Somebody, my son's good best friend on a hockey team, he wants to be in sports media. Can you get him a job there as an intern one summer? They get in, and that's part of what happens. And she says that is all now going to change supposedly at TSN. And I said, that's great. We'll see. And we'll see what happens. But, I think what I'd leave you with this message is that we're going to get knocked down. We got to get up and try to stay as positive as possible. And that's what I've tried to do all these years with Body Break.
Thank you so much, Al. That was very, very inspiring, and we can talk for hours. That was wonderful. Really wonderful. Anyways, thank you again. Anyways, we're coming to an end. Yeah, that was very good. Yep. Wonderful. We're coming to an end. We're coming to an end of this fabulous conference. We did run overtime, which is good overtime.
Good overtime, Bruce. Yes, yes.
Really, I'll have to just mention everybody. I don't have a list in front of me, but everybody.
So, Bruce, let me help you. I really want to thank our co-sponsor, producer, BizON, our BizON Capital Corporation, our supporters, KLX Valuation, and Black Business and Professional Association, Canadian Association of Urban Financial Professionals, the Canadian Chinese Finance Association, Real World, Startup Canada, Testopper Community, Young Canadians in Finance, and the Canadian Association of Black Lawyers. And of course, we couldn't do it without Toronto.com, our media partner, the Wiltshire Group, and B. Stellar Group, and of course, Beautiful Graphics. Really thank our supporters for the amazing support. And of course, our Voices of Humanity participants and featured speakers and the panelists. We couldn't have done this without you. So thank you to each and every one of you for making this conference possible, and to our participants who really stayed with us throughout the sessions to really put the blueprint forward for the New Humanity Initiative 7-pillar framework. Thank you. Over to you, Bruce.
I just want to add one to that. Talking beautiful graphics, there's one person that you see behind the scenes that has worked. I mean, sometimes getting emails, if you got emails at 4 a.m, from Christina. I mean, the work that Christina did to organize this and put this together, it's an emotional thing, really. It's exceeded everybody's expectations, the graphics, the producing. I mean, like a one man does the work of 5 people. It's just the passion that this person has is just fantastic. So I want to say thank you to Christina. She is a gold mine. And if you ever want to have a great person, great graphics, she's freelance. Hire her, but don't hire her because we want her.
Don't take her away. Just hire beautifulgraphics.ca.
Amazing.
Christina
amazing
Bruce
individual and conscientious beyond. Okay, I wanted to tell you about that. Anyways, we're going to close. Thank you so much to everybody who attended. And one last thing.
Yes, Bruce.
This is not over. Okay.
Oh no, no, we got to keep moving the dial. Yeah.
But our team is planning another event. We're not going to tell the topic, but we're probably looking at October for the next one. Okay.
I think it's 3 months from now, Bruce, I think. And it's going to be more focused on the pillars for the New Humanity Initiative.
No, we're going to focus on smaller sessions.
Yes.
No, but there will be communication. There's stuff going to happen. We got some cool stuff. It may not be the big, I call it the blockbuster. Okay, stay tuned, and encouraging everybody, please stay connected. Please connect with all of us on LinkedIn, and and have a wonderful, there's some just great stuff coming. And we're very excited.
So Bruce, let me take the opportunity to thank you and your team for the superb work and for the vision and the insight. I really, if I had to lift my hat off to you, and of course to Sharon Barnes Simmons, and to other moderator Stacey Berry for the superb facilitation, and all the moderators and sponsor leading community forum. And last but not least, I call Christina our humanoid, because if it wasn't for her, what we're seeing here would not have been possible. So on behalf of the entire team at the New Humanity Initiative and BizON, or BizON Capital Corporation, Christina, or humanoid, thank you so very much for the excellent work. And thanks to everyone. And we will see you.
Thank you. We forgot you, but thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Wonderful.
Bye-bye. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Bruce. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Have a wonderful day. Thank you, everybody.
Yes, thank you, Heather.
Bye, Bruce.
And the Coevolution